Actually, it's just sun up. So.
That's only 6 a.m. in the morning.
It does.
You need it? A little bit? You're welcome.
Okay, with that, it's all set.
Thank you.
Cool.
Doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah, you'll have to talk about the
Yeah. Oh, so that becomes the first person, is the background. You have to
Okay.
do all that, and then
Okay, alright. So we're gonna do some.
Yep.
We can keep this every Thursday. Would anybody prefer?
It's
Better.
It's
Would
better
anybody
the other
prefer
way
fresh
around,
air?
but
It's
good
not.
now.
It's clogged outside, so
It's the windows are painted.
Does everybody go there?
But we had the guys turn it down. So
Yeah.
it's 19.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Ja,
It's
sommige,
way better.
sommige conferenties maakt de keuze al eens een beetje van wat voor soort conferenties. Nou, die zijn klein. En dat zijn in principe heel veel tempo. Dus dan moet ik gewoon een afleiding hebben.
Ja.
Dan kies ik voor een tempo echt veel lager, omdat het een veel grotere groep is. En daar hou ik wel van
Steve, anything else you need to see?
Omdat je dus bijvoorbeeld ziet, is en nu ik moet het bouwen.
Ja.
Die zou zeggen, jongens, wat een jeugd. Jeugd. Ik doe juist jeugd. Dat is ook, ben jij jeugd? Ja. Jong op hoogte van. Ik wil onze organisatie, maar dat is ook vaak proberen. We zijn altijd tot de conclusie gekomen dat de mannen van jouw generatie en de generatie daarna eigenlijk nauwelijks meer competitief concurrerend kunnen zijn. De dames zijn ook niet. En dat heeft dus iets te maken met kennelijk het systeem dat wij hebben gebouwd voor het onderwijs en alles. Dat gewoon echt ja. Dus en ik doe niet voor de correctie hoor. Het gaat niet over hoe nee, je kunt benadeeld. En kennelijk is het systeem nu zo aangepast dat het nu terug is. En dan zie je dat in deze wereld in het algemeen van de vrouwen het woord over hebben, want dat bepaalt is het mannen, dat is gewoon een kloot. En dat is zo geweldig goed. Als je nu niet op de relatie verbinding kan maken, dan ga je minder. Het is geen mechanische biologische wereld meer. Het is een natuurlijk connecte wereld. En dan moet je skills hebben. Ja, dan moet je die skills hebben. En als je die skills niet hebt, dan kom je ook met een woord terecht dat je goed zit uit je gaat. Ja, en dat is niet de kleinigheid, dat is essentiële woorden. Toen vond je achter dat is helemaal voorbij. En ik had doorgaan, want voor heel veel en die les worden dat was dan weer. Maar dus, nee, dus mijn omslag die is natuurlijk nog niet af. Het zijn hele kernen van maar iets meer dan dat.
absentee,
Okay,
and then, but I let all that lapse.
okay. Well, so here we call you a paramedic.
Correct.
You might have to point it that way.
Might have to turn it on.
There we go. All right, we're ready to go if you want to take your seats. Well, welcome back. I hear a few of you went to the bar to have a glass of milk or something at lunchtime. So congratulations for doing that. Our next session is Community Paramedics and the Social Determinants of Health and about navigation. And Dr. Tangy.
Yeah, I'm Pete Tangy. I come from Minnesota, and I'm excited to be able to talk a little bit about social determinants of health. My background is not academic in terms of teaching, but just being a fan of academics. And I currently am the medical director of a community paramedic program at North Memorial in Minnesota, and has been almost a year now working with them. Prior to that was working and started a program at a different agency, and then have a clinical practice in emergency medicine and board certified emergency medicine and EMS physician. So. And then first to start off, I've over the weekend had a fun occasion to have conversations with some friends from Southern Hemisphere, and at the end of it, they're like, well, aren't you going to apologize? And I said, what for? And they said, for your president. So I'm just going to apologize real quick. Sorry for any consternation that we're causing people. So that's the elephant in the room. At least that's what it feels like for me. And I'm headed after this to visit my family in Belgium, and I know that'll keep coming up. So sorry. Social determinants of health. I think I came to know this term somewhat when I was going through medical school in the late 90s. I think we were starting to talk about this a little bit, but I certainly didn't get any additional training in it. Certainly nothing required. I learned, I worked with some immigration health in New York City and started to be exposed to these concepts. And I think now, at least my awareness of them is increasing over the last 4 to 5 years, and I think it ties well to what we're trying to do with community paramedicine. And so why should we care about it? I think it helps us think more broadly about the work that we do, and certainly now that I'm working in community paramedicine, I realized that 25 years ago when I was an EMT in a small town in northern Minnesota, when we would not go back in service or run by someone's house who my partner knew about, who had lived there forever, we were doing community paramedicine, but we were kind of doing it illegally, but it was pretty fun. So I think it helps with that sort of change the mindset of looking at problems different. You know, the problems that we've been doing every day the same way, looking at it different. I think the idea of value proposition is really important. So like some of the slides have shown, where the hospitals and some of the people who will be paying us to do this work, they're really starting to think about the social determinants of health. And then I just like how social determinants of health, which I'll give you my definition in a moment, but I like how it really provides an intersection for public safety, for wellness, for public health. So to me, it's an answer to that question I remember asking 15 years ago about, are we, for our EMS work, are we public health or public safety? And I think this helps answer that question, at least from my point of view. So the goal is real quickly to mention social determinants of health and then and describe how we're addressing them in our program. And so hopefully at the end, you'll be able to list 2 social determinants of health. Appreciate the cultural perspective and then think of ways that you can impact that as you head back to your own work. And this morning I already had a couple new ideas, so I'm really happy with the conference so far. For me, I think social determinants of health is sort of like the comment from earlier about EMS, or if you've seen one community paramedic program, you've seen one community paramedic program. I think social determinants of health in a similar way. I don't think it's clearly defined. People put pieces of it out and call it different things, but here's a busy wheel. And then if I was better at research, I'd like to do is see how much PowerPoint is the new acronym, and if people just determine enough social determinants of health to fit whatever the PowerPoint template is. So here's a couple of those. And then again, back to my earlier apology, one thing that was a epiphany for me or blew my mind like a year and a half ago, at least from a perspective of an American, is that there is a distinct difference in language between, in our case, it's Republican versus Democratic, but I think in talking to friends from other places, it's kind of a liberal versus conservative point of view. And the point being that if I go into a meeting and am coming from a more Democratic perspective or liberal perspective, if other people in the room are from a conservative perspective, the language might set us up to fail. So what was really interesting, and this is based out of research that the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation did, is highlighting how, again, in the U.S., a Democrat thinks of things in terms of equality, or that an imbalance of health is unjust. So if I'm having a Democratic moment and come in all convinced that my community paramedic program is the right thing to do because it's affecting justice, if I'm speaking to someone from a conservative point of view, they would say, well, that's just a natural state, so that's why I'm not going, I don't have the same motivation to pay because that's just the state of things. And vice versa, I might come in and build a case that says this is really addressing just a natural inequality. So some people are going to not do well and some people will, and that's my perspective. It's good if I'm having that Republican moment. But if I'm speaking to a Democratic funder or payer, that is where our program's at, then that might not speak and motivate them in the same way. So my point with this slide is not that one is right or one is wrong, but that to me it was a real eye-opener, because I just thought, well, doesn't everyone think that, that this is how healthcare should be? And the fact is that there is probably a leaning based on your person's perspective of whether or not it's a justice issue or a natural state. And I think we can translate that to when we're trying to think about motivating our patients too, to understand what their perspective might be as well. So if I bring something up that either that raises a question or that you want to point out a difference that might be more applicable to someone from the UK or Australia or Netherlands or wherever, please feel free to point that out. But again, this I think probably really opened up my eyes quite a bit to some of the struggles we were having. So, and again, I'll leave it at the end of the talk some mentions if people are looking to learn more about social determinants of health. I've had good luck through some of the online courses, and there's that academic piece where, you can sit and talk about the 5 social determinants of health or whatever, but then trying to get it to translate into the real world is, I think, the really fun part about me, and I think a fun part about the work that I get to do is that I can come to a conference here, and we can be texting then during break or lunch to the medics who are working back home right now and say, hey, do something different. So I think that's the fun part about this kind of work. And so here's the social determinants that I think of. And it's essentially describing the ecology. And again, this is a theme I heard in a couple of the other talks, understanding what are the needs you're trying to meet. Are you trying to offload free up ambulance resources? Are you trying to address food, or a place where maybe you don't have the same senior services that that somewhere else might. So, and that it comes back to that community needs assessment. This just is the concept of community paramedicine that I work out of, and it's this notion that there's an umbrella of community resources that exist. We all have them. They're all different. There's a population on one side, and there's different ways that you can define a population. There's all these services on the left side, and it can be a variety of different things, a hospital, or I think since a year ago, since I used this slide, I think adding in that other healthcare asset, which is, let's see if I change this. I would make this circle, I think, is getting bigger and bigger for us as we start to think about the services we're providing, that maybe the true partner isn't the hospital, because maybe that's not really the best health place, but maybe the true partner is the YMCA or a grocery store or someone else where health is really occurring. And then I'm really fortunate to work with a really solid group of community paramedics in Minnesota, and then we work together side by side. So I see the medical, back to Pierre's not here, so I can say it. But I think I see my role as a medical director, not as a director, but as a partner and we both have different skill sets, and together we become a really powerful team. And then the telehealth technology piece being what helps us bridge things. So community needs assessment, like Gary was talking about. And my point here is that, we've done our community needs assessment. It's a dynamic process. I think we're able to create a pretty good lay of our land and where, what the needs are. We're learning how to do that to help other people do a community needs assessment when they approach us for help with a problem. But the other fun thing for us, being 3-4 years into our programs, is the patient is really a tremendous teacher about what are the needs, because it's that academic versus real world piece where we have the academic idea of, this clinic works here, there's the senior services, there's the pharmacy, there's whatever, all these resources, and then the patient is the one who we really need to do that needs assessment with, and to help them learn to navigate the process. So this is one of our senior medics. This guy's done, I think, everything you can do pretty much in EMS, and he's just really gifted at sort of representing both the patients but also our group. And then one of our patients, and I think we keep learning, this patient had X problem, we found Y and Z solution, and now that we're beginning to develop some institutional knowledge, we're able to say, patient C now has the same issue as X, so we're going to connect them with Y and Z. And that's where I keep coming back to that one circle of the community or the other healthcare asset becoming a bigger and bigger circle, because we realize, the Y's got a diabetes educator or whatever it is. And so back to one of the social determinants of health is food and food insecurity. In Minnesota, we're well fed, but we have some other issues. And I think what's interesting here is our unemployment rate has been dropping, but our food insecurity needs have been rising. So I think it reflects other costs of living that people have. And so this is, when I worked on the streets more, I remember passing the hat for a collection. You'd run into a patient, an individual, and there'd be some situation where they didn't have food, or, the kids didn't have the right jackets or whatever it was, and we'd pass the hat and everyone put things in. So in my democratic moods, I feel like that's not just. So it's not just to make the paramedics pay for that, and it's not sustainable. So one of the things that we've been working on is how do we address food insecurity? Because again, a lot of times people would pitch in and buy a bag of grocery and leave it for the patients, but not affect a long-term change. And so we found a partner, and this is a nod actually to we're in Minnesota, again, a couple different community paramedic programs. I would encourage people, if you haven't been doing this, to connect with the other people in your region who are doing the community paramedicine, because one of our partners at Alina Health was able to set up, or found this group that does emergency food rations. that are designed to be shelf stable and are designed to connect people to a local grocery with a food cart or whatever. And so our holiday party, we went and made some boxes, and now we have that resource available. So it's been good, and we can divide it up into like a bag that for one of like someone who maybe who's homeless, we can give them a small bag that they can put into their jacket, or if they have a house and just don't have food, we can give them 20 meals. That my hope, this is a new service we have. My hope is that we get to the point where we're starting to cook with the people in their houses. So showing them not only here's the box, but let's go through and cook. And I forget who was talking, somebody, but mentioning, you know, yeah, like showing them how to use the sodium labels on their soup cans or whatever to really understand how their food can impact their health. So that's been a good partnership. Transportation's huge for us. We officially don't transport patients, our community paramedics, but I think as a director, I know we put people in a tough spot because sometimes that's the true barrier to some immediate need. One thing that I learned from one of our paramedics, they started taking the bus with their patients. These were patients, we were taking care of a group of people from Burma. And so it was perfect. They had a big apartment building that many of them had resettled in. It was a 5-minute shot down the bus line. But for these folks who had just come to the country, didn't know English very well, just needed someone to take them once to show how to get to the clinic. And I thought it was a really cool leap that the paramedic took to say, you know what, I'll ride the bus with you to your appointment and back. Since then, I've known we do this more often now, and it takes a little bit of encouraging, like, because sometimes the medics have never ridden the bus before. So it's getting out there on the bus. But I think this is another interesting potential partner. If maybe next year we'll talk about how we're connecting with our bus company, not just the specialty or like the invalid bus company, but just the public transportation and showing them, having the medics help navigate through that. So. And our community partners really are critical to us. So we are fortunate. Pillsbury may be a name you recognize from food. It's a big food company in Minnesota. We have a couple big food companies. So they have a foundation, and our community health workers are come from this Pillsbury group. And again, a really neat, a really cool way. And I haven't fully processed, but I love that whole concept of kind of the entry level being the community health worker, and then being able to have them help us do their work because they're coming from the building that we're working in, or the neighborhood that we're working in, and then being able to translate things. So I got to go visit a really fun older lady with one of our community health workers. The experience going into the house with the community health worker, who is a wonderful woman named Sydney. She looks and is grown up in a similar culture as to our patient. It was so much more fun for me to go in that way versus just going in on my own, or with just because of we talked about chitlins and all the things, all these foods that I wasn't maybe familiar with, or she maybe would not have been as comfortable talking about. And so that diet discussion was a lot different with our community health workers. So they're a huge, again, fortunate in Minnesota where we have a good group of advocates for this role, but I think connecting with them to address the social determinants is really helpful. Social workers, again, kind of on that other end of the spectrum where they're up with, our licensed social workers have also been really, really valuable partners. I think it's an interesting, I'm curious 2 to 3 years from now to see how this conversation is playing out at this conference, because I think my observation is a lot of our community paramedics are becoming mini social workers. And either our education needs to catch up to that part for them, or we need to become very clear about where we pass that task off to our social work partners. It's challenging. I don't have a good answer for it, but I know that the social workers, because when they hear and see the impact that our community paramedics are having with their patients, are really important advocates for us, and they've been volunteering their time essentially. And we're just starting to have a social worker who's going out on ride-alongs to see more how they, what we're actually doing, and figure out ways that they can impact better our work together. And so if you look back at the slide deck, you're not going to see anywhere the mention of pets. And on one of the slides, though, earlier today, there was a mention of the DVM up at the top screen. And so to me, I was happy to see a vet listed somewhere on the slide deck other than here, and hopefully maybe someone else has already got some experience with it. I'm surprised how often pets are come up for us. It makes sense thinking about it. You know, some of these folks are pretty lonely, and social isolation being one of the social determinants. Some of them address that loneliness through their relationship with their pets. Sometimes it's the issue of like hoarding, where we've had a couple people with way too many cats. But this cage is really interesting to me. This cage represents a safe new home for one of our patients, her parrot. I've had the occasion to feel threatened now with this patient with every species of animal in someone's house. But we have one of our patients, and this bird flies around her apartment free. She's never been in a cage, and there's bird shit everywhere. And she's a really interesting woman. She's Pete, you asked me yesterday if I knew a jet propulsionist, and she actually was a NASA scientist. So, but amazing. So this really, really wonderful woman, she's crazy, but she's wonderful, wonderful. Moved here, she's old now, she's retired, she lives in an apartment. She's got this bird who's lived, like, it's older than I am, I think. It's this gray parrot. And it attacked me in a bathroom because I really wanted to see it. I kept hearing about this bird, so I went to the apartment. It scared the hell out of me. But we're trying to help her transition, and we're working with, you know, her doctor, her care coordinator, all these things about saying, you know, it's not safe. It's not safe right now in your apartment. There's all these different issues: food, medication safety, fall safety, all these things. It's not critical now, but at some point it's going to be. If an ambulance shows up at your house, they're going to freak out because, again, there's bird crap and all this stuff everywhere. Our paramedic is not accepting of it as being normal, but she's comfortable going into that environment. And by working with the patient, she's identified that, yep, she recognizes. She recognizes something's got to change. She's getting older. But her big barrier is there's not a place for her bird to be. And so we've been really working hard to find a place that will accept her and her bird. And one of the requirements was having a bird cage. So 2 weeks ago, this is from Craigslist, our medics have been looking for the right bird cage and found it and got the right price. And there was a little collection of the group, and we all pitched in and bought her this bird cage. But to me, it's, again, going through all my academic classes on social determinants, public health, pets get a nod, but this is a real world example. And I think hopefully in 2 years we'll have someone here saying, here's how you deal with pets, and it's more than, but maybe, I don't know. The number of cats that people have is just remarkable to me. So, and maybe, yeah, go ahead, please. Say thanks.
Maybe another example of this I was a policeman, so I came to the nice part of the.
Do you want to come up and read it?
I'm from the Netherlands. I hope you understand that sometimes I have to find some words for the similar, for the things I would like to mean, and then I try to describe what I mean. I would like to give an example of domestic violence where women actually stay at home because of the pets, because they don't want to leave the pets, and the pets don't go to another place. can't get out, and they won't leave the house because of the fact that their dog they simply love has to stay in the place where they are actually being beaten down to death in a specific moment. And there is a special organization that is in the Netherlands that's actually taking care of the pets and asking for foster homes for the pets, for women and children that go out of their domestic or of the situation and go to a safer place for them and know that the pet that they have and love is actually getting a safe home also and coming back to them at the moment that the house is safe for them again. So that's also an example of taking care of each other, I think. So I had to mention it.
Good. Well,
Thank you.
yeah. So we keep looking for our pet partners in the States, and you know, a lot of our measurements don't really address social determinants. Some do, but I think that's that's going to be important for us, especially with the value proposition. So here's some resources on social determinants of health. Again, my disclaimer is I don't have any financial connections, but I've really been enjoying Coursera. They have some really good offerings from different universities across the world. And then the Robert Wood Johnson, I think, is really they're doing a good work on these issues. So, any other questions? We'll talk about some. We get the chance to talk about some of our other programs too, or we'll highlight some of our other interventions. Go ahead, Pete.
Peter, we actually teach social determinants of health in our paramedic program right up front, and it really is a thread that goes all the way through. What we find is the students, when they start the course, think this is a complete lot of rubbish. And what's it got to do with being a paramedic? And it's not till they actually go on a few placements that they start to understand that, oh, I just saw that. That's what was in the class a year ago.
Yeah.
So it takes a while to sort of sell the whole concept, and existing paramedics, because they didn't do the formal training, actually don't have a form of words to describe what they see every day. And it's actually the social determinants of health.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and I think, yeah, it points to the importance of getting this training.
Thanks. I'm curious, when you have a patient enrolled into your program that's not English speaking, how do you deal with that?
So, I learned this from one of the paramedics on the bus, and I've seen medics again kind of unofficially use Google Translate. They read into their iPhone. They hit play. The patient they speak into iPhone, and so we've used that. And then it's becoming one of our questions when we partner with new people, is saying, how do you need to cover interpretive services so that we're not incurring that cost as well. So we've used some phone interpreters. And then our community health workers, sometimes they speak a language too. Pete, you
also offer, just because we're on video representing North Memorial, we do offer full interpretive services through our clinic system. So if any patient needs it, they have the opportunity. But I think on the fly, a lot of people have used other means, especially in the 911 realm. So,
yeah. So it's one program I worked with. North is good if it's a patient from our health system. We use our interpreter for that. If it's working with someone who's not part of our system, then we look for an arrangement with an interpretive service. My funny story there is we had a medic, so with this Korean group of people from Burma, some of the other medics were really excited about the work we were doing, and so one of them went and translated everything, but into Mandarin Chinese. So I'm like, well, we're getting closer, but but it was cool just because, and Dr. Muir, to your point, the way I see that is the medics saying, before I got my community paramedic training, I'd go on a bunch of bullshit calls, and now that I'm trained in this, there's no more bullshit calls, which I think speaks really to that.
Just follow up to the language barrier question. Have you or plan to measure differences between patients who have language barriers versus those that don't in terms of outcomes for the community paramedic patients?
Not specifically, no. I think it'd be interesting. And I think that'd be another plug I would say if there's someone who's looking for research projects but maybe doesn't have the people on this working as much, we'd love to talk more about putting our data in with someone else.
I have a quick question, just a piggyback on that. Talk to Ryan White in the back. He did all of our data evaluation for Eagle County, and it was one of the key demographics that we measured from patient number 1. So there's some good information there.
Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Taggy. And next we have Jackie, and she's a registrar at the Saskatchewan College of Paramedics. And so those of you from the U.S., please pay attention to Jackie as she speaks.
The rest of you can go to sleep. All right. Well, good afternoon. I think I have a tough spot because this is right around when your blood sugar starts just dropping right off. And so don't worry. As long as you don't fall out of your chair, it's all good. Okay, let's see here. So, as Gary mentioned, I am the regulator for paramedics in Saskatchewan. What that means is in Saskatchewan, we are, our profession, or your profession, I should say, is self-regulated. So we issue licenses and oversee practice and define scope of practice for our practitioners in the province. And in amongst all of that, we've encountered some really interesting things. And what I'm going to speak about today is medical assistance in dying. And this isn't necessarily end-of-life care as much as it is ending life. And so although this topic is probably somewhat common in other countries, in Canada it's very, very new. And the implementation whoops, did I do that? That's okay. And the implementation has not been without problems because initially, as in most other countries, medical assistance in dying is really only administered by physicians. But in Canada, it's slightly different. So we're going to go through a little bit of an information session just to give you some background, and then I'll tell you exactly how it's impacted the paramedic profession in our province. So the objectives of my presentation today are to provide you with a basic understanding of how our new law in this area impacts paramedic service, to identify potential areas in which paramedics can become involved and do become involved, to talk a little bit about the implications of paramedic involvement in it, and to share some practice challenges that we've already encountered with respect to what we call MAID. So as a bit of background, Canada, not considering Quebec, is relatively new to medically assisted death. And a major shift occurred with the Supreme Court decision in 2015 called Carter versus Canada. And this decision underscored the needs to reconcile the interests of patients and providers. So in Carter v. Canada, it was a landmark Supreme Court decision where the prohibition of assisted suicide was challenged as being contrary to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so the key person that challenged it was Kay Carter, which was a woman suffering from degenerative spinal stenosis, along with Gloria Taylor, a woman who had ALS at the time. So in February of 2015, the court struck down the provision in the criminal code giving Canadian adults who are mentally competent and suffering intolerably an enduring right to a doctor's help in dying. And the court basically allowed 12 months. It suspended its ruling for 12 months to allow the government to get its ducks in a row and arrange the necessary laws. And in January 2016, they granted an additional 4-month period to the ruling to allow time for the newly elected Liberal government to consult with Canadians on drafting the law. But in the meantime, what they did was they allowed provincial courts to begin approving applications for euthanasia until the new law was passed. So criminal code changes were necessary to allow patients to access medical assistance in dying and to remove the potential for criminal prosecution under the criminal code. So the new provisions basically defined who could assist in medical assistance in death. The parts of the criminal code that prohibited MAID would no longer be valid. So under the new law, eligible adults could request medical assistance in dying, and in this way it would allow people a bit of opportunity for self-determination if they had what the courts have considered an irremediable medical condition. And it also provided a bit of protection for those who were considered vulnerable. The net result of this is that healthcare providers still have the freedom to object as conscientious objectors, but they're required by law, even if they object, to provide information about all end-of-life options, and they have to provide a referral to another healthcare provider who will participate. And so that becomes a really important note, because if you're not part of the identified professions that can help people end their lives, you don't have necessarily all this information to make that referral, but you still have an obligation to make it. And then the third-party agency or service could also provide transfer of care to another provider. Basically, the MAID legislation itself contains an exemption which allows specific medical practitioners to assist a patient in ending his or her life. The law is very, very specific with respect to who can assist. So right now, only medical practitioners, which are physicians, nurse practitioners, and pharmacists can participate. Only these three people or three professions can assist in providing or dispensing medications to assisted patients. The indemnification does not protect anyone from civil prosecution or complaint to a regulatory body. Paramedics are not included, and yet significant potential exists for them to become involved, and I'm going to speak very specifically to that. So despite the changes to the criminal code, it's still a crime in Canada to assist suicide or to counsel people to commit suicide unless you're exempted under MAID. And this is really important, because if paramedics become involved in any way in administering something that's going to end somebody's life, potentially they could be charged under the criminal code. So just as a bit of additional background, what is medical assistance or medical assistance in dying? Well, two options exist, and they both include participation of a nurse practitioner or a physician or two physicians or whatever. But basically, you can have direct administration of a substance that causes death, which is voluntary euthanasia, or they can give or prescribe medication that's self-administered, which would be medically assisted suicide. And depending on the jurisdiction, right now, I believe that it's really just medical assisted. I'm not certain that any other jurisdictions are yet allowing self-administered. There we go. It's not easy for a patient to be deemed eligible for MAID in Canada. In order to be deemed eligible, you have to meet all of a number of conditions. So you have to be eligible for health funding in Canada. That's important because they didn't want any medical tourism happening. Generally, you have to be 18 years of age and capable of making your own health care decisions. So emancipated minors, it's still a challenging issue that hasn't yet been fully resolved. People have to have a grievous and an irremediable medical condition. They have to be terminally ill. So people struggling with illnesses that won't kill them in the imminent future are not eligible. And there was a big debate in the Senate about this, and I'll talk about that in a minute. They have to make a voluntary request for this without pressure, and they have to be provided informed consent after being informed of their options, and that means their medical diagnosis has to be discussed, available forms of treatment, and available options to alleviate their suffering, including palliative care. People with mental illness are eligible for medical assistance in dying as long as they meet all the other conditions. So mental illness alone is not sufficient to make them eligible for this service, which is really inconsistent with a lot of European countries. Death in mentally ill people is not reasonably foreseeable, and so they would not be eligible. Eligibility is very important to understand because should a paramedic become involved in medical assistance in death, they have to actually verify eligibility. Every practitioner has to physically verify it and ask for proof. Right now, the only people who can determine eligibility are the physicians or nurse practitioners. And it has to be two people. It can be two NPs, it can be two physicians, or one of each. It doesn't matter, it has to be two. And there's a 10-day waiting period between the time when somebody can request medical assistance in dying and when the actual administration of the substance occurs. And as I mentioned before, the practitioners have to visually, like, actually see documentation in order to verify. So irremediable medical condition, well, this is very specific to patients facing imminent death, leaving many to wonder whether or not the law actually accomplishes what it should. And that was the substantial debate that happened in the Senate, and they landed on this definition for now. So the disease or condition or whatever has to be incurable, the suffering has to be intolerable and cannot be relieved to the patient's satisfaction, and death is in the foreseeable future. But it's important to recognize that MAID is fundamental change to the scope and philosophy of how we deliver healthcare in Canada. And patients who request MAID do so for a variety of reasons. And uncontrolled pain is rarely the only reason or the primary reason for an underlying request. More often, people cite their primary motivation as being loss of control or loss of dignity and a desire not to be dependent on others for personal care. In that way, you can see how our legislation doesn't actually meet this need at all. So in terms of the patient decision, informed consent has to exist, so the patient has to be mentally competent and capable of making decisions at the time the service is provided. And this is because right before the substance is administered, they have to reaffirm their desire to be put to death. So when capacity is lost over time, that becomes a problem. I'm going to talk about substitute decision makers in a minute. The patient can withdraw consent at any time. And the challenge with the Saskatchewan approach right now is it doesn't currently address the issue of self-administration, nor does it address non-facility-based administration. So sometimes, what if a paramedic gets called and the patient is unconscious? Then what? Who decides? And can the family actually change the mind of the patient? Only 3 people, as I mentioned, can provide medical assistance in dying: physicians, NPs, and pharmacists. And pharmacists can only, they can't administer medication, they can only prepare the medication. So really only 2 people can. Other parties, however, can be involved, and this is where this profession comes into play. Allied health providers who provide care on a day-to-day basis can be called in. And family members obviously can provide support. That said, everybody has to follow the applicable rules under the criminal code and under the provincial and health-related laws. So it's still illegal. It's important to remember that it's still illegal to provide suicide advice or assistance, and paramedics are stuck between a rock and a hard place. In terms of conscientious objection, paramedics, not unlike other healthcare providers, are allowed to express objection in participating, but they're caught in our province between conflicting legislation. If they refuse treatment, they're in breach of Section 38 of our ambulance regulations. They could actually face discipline by my college. Unlikely, but they could. Again, because paramedic involvement was never contemplated when the government initially drafted MAID, policy and process have not incorporated the paramedics in this. And so now we're playing catch up with the law. So from a regulatory perspective, it's very unlikely if we had a paramedic go out to a call and they discovered it was MAID and they said they would not participate. It's very unlikely we would prosecute them under the other act, but you can see that we have some logistics to deal with here in ensuring that our professionals are not offside the legislation. In terms of practice implications, I'm sure you can appreciate that the potential for issues is significant. Paramedics can be found guilty of culpable homicide unless they bring their actions within the approved terms and activities defined within the criminal code. So how do they do this? Because paramedics are not identified as a profession that can help with MAID, they can only work under the direction of a doctor or an NP. They can't directly treat the patient. But even if they participate by starting an IV, they could face prosecution. And at the same time, they shouldn't even start the IV without proving eligibility. So it doesn't protect the paramedic in any way from civil liability or from being prosecuted. So the real question is, why would paramedics ever be involved? And when MAID was first introduced, we reached out to our Ministry of Health in the province and requested involvement in planning for the service delivery. And the ministry response was, well, I don't know why you would think paramedics could actually be involved. They're not allowed to be, so they won't be. And in their thinking, it was extremely unlikely that they'd ever be called in. But in reality, this is not how things are playing out. And that's not going to be a surprise to anybody in this room, because they're usually the first responder when emergencies happen and families get desperate. So when the ministry developed the protocol, they didn't contemplate any involvement by this profession. So there's no mention of how they fit in, and there's no role defined. So everybody's just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. What happened was we discovered that paramedics were being called in to start IVs and then do some symptom relief. And they absolutely can't be doing that if that could contribute to the end of life piece. And they weren't being told that these were made patients. So we've had them come in, being called in to do transfers, which are pretty innocuous unless they're asked to do symptom relief, IV starts. And probably the biggest and most troubling part of all of this is that in a need to provide patient confidentiality and privacy, there's no discussion of the fact that the patient is actually planning to end their life. There's no mention, or the paramedic has not been allowed to actually examine the patient. They're being brought in and told that they must do this. And they have no ability under Section 38 of our Ambulance Act to refuse to treat. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place. And our debate with the ministry continues on why we think paramedics will and are involved. I don't believe we landed here because the ministry was intentionally trying to be difficult, but I think our challenges arise from a fact that the government is attempting to streamline care by making determinations based on a straight line approach. So what I mean by that is that the provider skills will all be equal, the patient needs will all be the same, and the families all want the same thing. And we all know that that's not the case. Patients are unpredictable, and so are families. So the current model for MAID services is missing elements of process that involve other practitioners, especially paramedics. Paramedics are, in most cases, or in many cases, the most skilled people to start IVs. It wouldn't be the nurse practitioner, and it probably wouldn't be the doc. So something as simple as that, or simple as how do we get the patient to the facility, because now in Saskatchewan we're only doing facility-based MAID. How do you get them there? Well, you call the paramedic, and in the meantime, the person has anxiety, and they want the paramedic to administer something for anxiety. So let's further complicate this, and let's talk about what happens when a patient decides to self-administer medication. And I want to, again, preface this by saying that in Saskatchewan, we don't currently allow them to self-administer, but most patients who are at end of life or making that choice want to do so in their own environment. They don't necessarily want to go into a clinical setting. Bill C-14 explicitly acknowledges that self-administration has to be available to patients. They need to be able to receive assistance outside of a hospital setting, so the law was drafted accordingly. That said, self-administration may not be a part of our landscape for a while because of the availability of specific medications. But I pulled some really interesting information from data from the States, actually, that spoke to the complications that arise out of self-administration. So data from Oregon's experience with self-assisted death thus far suggests that of 991 total patients who self-administered, about half didn't have a medical provider. And there were 27 complications in the 556 cases that were actually reported. 6 reported cases in 17 years where patients regained consciousness. Complications aside, of the 536 cases where data was available, there was a reported time range from ingestion to death of 1 minute to 104 hours, with a median time of 25 minutes. So if you're the family sitting in the room waiting for your loved one to die and they're still not gone after 45 minutes, an hour, you might pick up the phone and ask for some help. And so this has not yet been contemplated by our province. Data from the Netherlands in another study suggests similar issues. So of 114 cases of assisted death, 10% had a technical problem, 7% had complications, 15% had longer than expected time to death or never actually ever became comatose. And the median time to death was 30 minutes with a range of 1 minute to 14 days. Again, that is a very long time to wait if you think that you're actually going to die imminently. And in 18% of the cases where a physician was present, they decided to administer lethal medication for obvious reasons. So given these stats, you can see how a family might call for help. And this is really where the rubber hits the road for us. Our EMS folks, our paramedic services folks get called for any number of things, but not the least of which is if family members see somebody struggling. So the appropriate response when a paramedic is called to the scene and the patient is struggling to die, we sought out a legal opinion so that we could provide our members with some advice. And this was the question of the hour. And our legal advice says that if you're asked to administer life-saving treatment, you can do so only if the patient requests it. And the patient can change their mind at any time. If the family requests it, even if the medical power of attorney exists, they cannot administer help. So this is a big problem because, lots of family may feel distressed by what they see. They may have never seen death, and they may not understand it, and they may want to bring their loved one back. But the patient decides, not the substitute decision maker. It doesn't matter whether MAID has been initiated or whether it has or has not been initiated. Our advice to members is that they can really only take direction from a physician or nurse practitioner, and even then they should not be resuscitating unless the patient asks for it. So if the paramedic attends a call and the patient appears to be in distress and the family's changed their mind, as I mentioned, they can't change their mind. But what's more difficult is where it's unclear whether or not the patient has actually changed their mind. And this is conceivable, obviously, when a loved one is calls a paramedic in to resuscitate somebody who's minimally conscious and insists that they change their mind right after ingesting the medication. And the paramedic may be torn between whether this is true or not true. Again, it's really tough because they're going to have to make a decision based on a case-by-case situation. And the Ontario College of Physicians and Surgeons actually amended their policy and said that, in cases where a physician disagrees with the substitute decision maker about full resuscitation, that they should try and reach agreement. If they can't, they should go ahead and administer resuscitation, but only if the patient is still going to be able to return to their previous level of function or a reasonable level of function. Paramedics do not have the same protection under the criminal code. So our advice is always to not get involved. So what the worst case is a paramedic gets called to a scene and they don't know it's a MAID case. Then they have to treat the patient as if it was a regular patient and resuscitate. As mentioned, this is a real problem for us. Paramedics are not being informed. It's a big secret. And in this circumstance, our advice is just to treat them as they would normally within their scope of practice, following normal treatment protocols. What if self-administered meds don't work or appear to not work, and the family wants you to help them finish their lives and end their lives? Our legal advice tells us again that treatment is never allowed, even if it appears the patient is struggling. So they can't participate. And so that puts the paramedic in a terrible spot because they're not used to standing there and just watching somebody pass. But our advice has always been to help the family at that time, not unlike other circumstances that they may walk into. The law does not permit paramedics to assist the patient at end of life, even if a doctor says, I want you to administer something to end this. They're not permitted to do so. What constitutes participation by a paramedic in Saskatchewan? Well, this is a Pandora's box because where treatment begins and ends is difficult to define, and anything can be viewed as active participation. Starting an IV, as I mentioned, is really the thin edge of the wedge because the IV start is the mechanism through which they're going to administer that final medication. And I already talked about symptom relief and the challenges around symptom relief. And in terms of legal, our legal advice suggests that a paramedic is only entitled to assist a nurse practitioner or a physician. They cannot actually assist the patient. That said, if the patient is asking to be resuscitated or to be given an antidote, they can do that. But aside from that, if the patient is simply wanting further assistance to die quicker, They can't do that. So with all of this information in mind, where does that leave the practitioner? And with the introduction of MAID, the issue of liability coverage is becoming very urgent. We do not currently have mandatory liability coverage in Saskatchewan. Our paramedic practitioners, where they're employed by a health region, may be covered by the health region, but they may not be covered for anything that potentially is offside of the law. And you can see how there's a lot of gray with respect to medical assistance in death. And so our advice from the college perspective is that you're going to need insurance. We are going to make liability insurance mandatory. We have to protect the public interest, but also to protect the practitioner. Because these circumstances, sometimes the practitioner just bumps up against them and they're caught. What's missing? Well, we're struggling still to have some acknowledgement by our government that paramedics are actually being included in these processes. And until we get that, we won't be able to define the proper roles and policies to support the process. So we'd like to see a script for non-physician, non-nurse practitioner healthcare providers to use in advising patients. So how do you inform the patient, understanding the laws and verifying eligibility? And we need a process map for these same healthcare providers. The current map only contemplates the involvement of the three defined providers. And in closing, I just want to say that although MAID is new and we're attempting to get in front of the train, it's rolling down the track. And so Canadian paramedic regulators are working on MAID specific guidelines, but nothing has been published yet. It's new territory, and many provinces have not considered the potential for EMS and paramedics to become involved, and it's putting the practitioner at risk and the patient. We end up relying on the work of other health professionals to guide us, which is not sufficient to meet the unique needs in Saskatchewan, or in Canada. Oopsie. Sorry, didn't mean to do that. While the full impact of MAID remains to be seen, there's little doubt that it'll change the delivery of medicine moving forward. And paramedicine, while not seeming to be involved, it actually is proving to be part of the process. The lack of guidance and structure around paramedic involvement in MAID goes beyond simply problematic. It has real moral and legal implications for the practitioner and the patient. And it's the responsibility of the regulators, the employers, and the members themselves to make sure they understand the implications of their involvement and their obligations and liabilities arising from that activity. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jackie. So one of the questions I get often is, tell me about your community paramedic program at Mayo. And for 13 years, the answer has been, well, we don't have one. But we have one now, and so we're going to hear from a couple of people that are engaged in that project. Dr. Paul Kranz is going to start out, and then Luke Myers will join in a bit.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity, and thanks to everyone for inviting me for this program. I'm gaining a lot of knowledge and destined to bring this back to improve our program at Mayo. A little background on me. I'm a retired military officer, medical surgeon, and when I left the military in 2008, I found myself in this brand new environment, this civilian system that I saw a lot of people kind of overutilizing. In my first couple of years in Mayo, I would pull my social worker to the side and I said, you know, this is the 8th time this patient has come to the ED in 6 months. Is there some form of process that we can engage these patients in order to keep them out of the ED? Because not only is it cost, they're getting radiated. There was a number of issues, I think, that kind of made me question the healthcare delivery system. And I thought, well, we're Mayo. We should be able to do something. We're patient-centric, and the patient comes first. Fast forward about 2 to 3 years, I was on my way to work, and National Public Radio was talking about a closure of one of our clinics in a north rural area, Prairie Farm. And that day, I happened to attend Chippewa Valley Technical College's presentation of Hennepin Tech's community paramedic program. Quite frankly, I knew nothing about community paramedic programs, and this was an eye-opener for me. I looked across at my paramedic supervisor, coordinator, and I said, you know, this is something that we might want to look at, especially given the services in our northern regions kind of being deleted. And we both got together and discussed this, and we came upon an administrator in a northern critical access hospital that had a rural grant. She wanted to do this, but she had no leverage and no one was really waving the flag. So with her support, we began to accumulate a body of individuals that help us put together a community paramedic kind of rough draft. This involved a number of different agencies within the hospital and the local technical college. Upon presentation to Population Health at Mayo Rochester, I was informed that I was in a long line of individuals that were trying to improve patient outcomes and patient care, everything from clinical pharmacists to nurse practitioners, palliative care, home health. And if we were going to engage this, that we needed some data. And we needed Mayo data that was specific to Mayo, because our organization is somewhat different than other healthcare organizations in how we provide care. So a little frustrated, because I thought we were being assigned an administrator assistant. I left the room with my cohort, and we both went to my office and sat down, and he thought, you know, we can still do this, and made some contacts with individuals at Gold Cross and Mayo Medical Transport, and this idea was enthusiastically brought online, and we began the process of developing our CP program. So this has been about 4 years in the making for me, and probably the last 2 years we've done some pretty intense work with developing our program and fielding it, and that's what we're going to go over today in some of our pilot results. And this is the slide. Is that? Which did that? So this is Barron, Wisconsin, Barron County, Wisconsin. It's in the northwestern region of Wisconsin. We have a critical access hospital there. Roughly serves a population of, I guess we don't have the oh, there it is, 45,000, about 890 square miles that our community paramedics cover. Gold Cross Ambulance in Barron, Wisconsin employs 9 full-time advanced care paramedics and gets about 1,500 calls of 911 and interfacility transports. Mayo Clinic in Northland is our critical access hospital. We have about 5 in the region. Eau Claire is the center with a level 2 trauma center, a relatively large hospital, but these critical access hospitals kind of serve and filter and we're the referral center. It is itself a 25-bed critical access hospital with primary care, about 445 employees. So we took a multidisciplinary approach to this. I knew that if we were going to engage this process, that we would have to get buy-in. And that buy-in, I felt, was important not only just for the situational awareness, but also we wanted to make sure that we weren't stepping on anybody's toes. We used myself, emergency department physician leadership, clinical pharmacists we engaged, also healthcare administration, EMS leadership from Gold Cross, and research coordination. We brought nurses in from the go. We did that purposefully just because we knew that they were going to be one of the individuals or groups that may put a barrier to us moving forward. Home health and hospice, Office of Population Health, palliative care, quality resources. We got our own IT representative to help us build our medical record, compliance individuals, and then, of course, local paramedics. So what we did, what Gold Cross was able to accomplish is we took two community paramedic trained individuals and placed them both half-time. So we basically took one FTE, so one community paramedic FTE, split those between those 2 individuals and operated. We sat and walked through our medical guidelines. We had a number of meetings where we wrote what our expectations were, and then, of course, appropriated the vehicle and equipment necessary. So the patients that we wanted to engage first, of course, my mantra was these high utilizers, frequent flyers, some would call them. We initially took a poll of the Barron area and found that there were about 100 patients in that area that compromised 1,700 ED visits within a year. So we wanted to target these individuals initially. We got in hold of their primary care providers. We actually started out making cold calls, and they weren't really received very well. They didn't know what we were doing. We thought probably we were trying to sell them something. And we found significant assistance when we brought in the primary cares and had them do a referral, sat the patient down and discussed the need, and what the community paramedic could do, and we found great acceptance after that. We wanted to get an N of about 20 patients a week, and as we were walking into this process, the first probably couple of weeks, we only had about 7, I think 9, 7, 12, somewhere around there. We knew that we needed to increase our N for the pilot study. So we also looked at readmission risk, and Mayo Clinic has a pretty detailed method by which they gauge readmission risk. And the new health standards in the states under Medicare is if the patient gets readmitted within 72 hours, that patient's care would not be reimbursed. And as of this last year, in October of 2016, it will now be a fine. So there was an emphasis to try to identify these people, and in the medical record in Cerner, as nurses enter variables into this process, the computer generates a readmission risk, and it gives them a score. So we targeted people that had a score of 14 or above, which was the top of the scale, basically, of readmission risk, and we targeted those individuals, and we had great success there too. What was good is that our community paramedics were actually able to engage family members and the patients in the hospital before they went home. And then the paramedic would set up a time within 24, 48 hours to get to the house to perform med reconciliation, health assessments, risk assessments, and social connections. These people we knew were going to be rolling on and rolling off of our roles because we would get them through that kind of bridge area until other social services or healthcare services could be amassed. And we were still looking for more patients. And one of our regional trauma advisory councils has a fall risk prevention program in our area. And they were having a great deal of difficulty engaging ADRC and other social services for these at-risk patients. They were being identified by EMS. When EMS went into the home, if they noted a few different criteria, they would leave a packet, contact ADRC. ADRC would come out and do assessments in the home and assist with everything from grab bars to moving rugs and other assisted devices. And so we filled that gap for them. We started seeing some of their fall risk patients that weren't getting their ADRC referrals in a timely manner. We went ahead and put together a pretty good orientation for our primary care providers. We sat them down, told them what we could offer as far as our community paramedic visits and how that might fit into the care plan. That was greatly received by all. So initially, we sought out 6 primary care physicians and offered them the paramedic referrals. But now we're getting referrals from all over. And now we're actually getting referrals from ambulance agencies. They're calling up and saying, hey, this patient would probably benefit from a community paramedic visit and referral. So what we do is we have a relatively robust electronic medical record through Cerner, and it is Mayo-wide. So I can go on and see any patient in the Mayo Care Health System, or Mayo Clinic Health System, excuse me, and the paramedics who are Gold Cross are Mayo Medical Transport affiliated, so they have similar access to that medical record. So we created our own scheduling process with one of our administrators, wrote the scheduling process, and the community paramedics basically went to their computer every day and they could see how many visits or new patients had been referred and what the scheduling would look like. Every visit is probably about an hour. There are some that may be a little bit more brief because we started doing different lab tests in the field like INRs for Coumadin checks, but typically about an hour. The paramedics perform a relatively detailed history and physical examination. They review medication compliance, so they'll go through the patient's medications. They'll ask them about taking the medications, any untoward effects. They get kind of primed by our clinical pharmacists so they can speak in an educated way about what to expect from the medication, why it's important to take, and then communicate with that patient in the home. We also have gone in and assisted with setting up their medication planners, and we've actually removed medications that the patient should not be taking. We don't necessarily control them, but we'll take them, identify them, and place them in a cupboard somewhere and say, hey, these aren't the ones you should be taking right now. We do a PEAT scale home health and safety assessment where it takes everything into effect of the number of stairs, rugs, clutter, air conditioning, heat, a lot of different factors, transportation, And we put that on a scale and are able to kind of get a risk assessment done that way. Family members, we have a couple of community paramedics that actually now are seeing both the husband and wife. They felt that the husband saw what was going on with the wife and said, hey, I think I might help benefit from that. But we also reach out to extended family, whether they're in the community or even out of state, to try to create that bond or that connection where sometimes it's difficult in some of these patients. The elderly patients, they kind of get lost and forgotten. Social services, of course, when appropriate, everything from ADRC down the list, we've engaged in the community. So the visit itself is documented in the electronic medical record, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But basically, we have created our own folder in the medical record, in the EMR, that the community paramedics note is populated to. We worked with IT to develop this format and this template, and basically the community paramedic goes in and populates the information. As soon as they do, it gets immediately put into the patient's folder as a home health visit, and one of the note then gets translated to the primary care provider for signature, and it gets sent to me as the medical director for signature. So we get that almost automatic review process of the patient's clinical visit in agreement. And we also communicate through the EMR in our messaging system. So I come into work and I can see that I have 13 labs from yesterday's visit that closed out when I was gone. I have an obligation to go in and sign those labs. Similarly, with this kind of information sharing, those notes get put right into that primary care provider's cache, and one goes to me. And also, of course, engaging others involved in the care plan. So, without further ado, this is the guy who does all the heavy lifting for us. Luke is going to talk about our pilot results.
Thank you. Okay, so we analyzed these data about 6 months after we started, so the population is not huge. Yeah, so we had 35 patients enrolled in the program. Those patients received a total of 268 visits, ranging from 1 to 33. Most patients had more than one visit, but we saw each instance of the one visit was typically patients that were referred for like home safety assessment or fall prevention. Median age was 77.7 years, and the majority of our patients were female. There we go. So this is the referral by department. We found this kind of interesting because, as Dr. Krantz touched on, when we initially started this, we focused on primary care physicians. And in the end, the emergency department physicians are actually the ones that did most of the referring. And you can see the two on the right side were actually requested by the spouse of the patient. When they did that, they contacted their primary care provider, so those could fall in either bucket. So the referral reasons, and there were many, management of medical condition, and I'll dig into those a little more in a second, was the primary one, and then falls at home safety was the second highest. Dr. Krantz talked about the 72-hour readmission patients. We had 6 of those, and then kind of a slew of other types of patients that I'll talk about. So there were 35 patients, but they weren't all referred at the same time. So some patients had 6 months post-enrollment, some had 2 months post-enrollment. And how we wanted to analyze this is look at the referral reason and how many times that patient had seen a physician, their primary care physician, been to an ED, or had a hospitalization based on that referral reason 6 months before. It'll wake you up. 6 months before the program, and then 6 months after. So of the 35 patients, only 17 had completed the whole 6 months post. So that's what this table refers to, and I'll walk you through this because it's a little confusing. So if you look at the first row, it'll tell you that reduced frequency of primary care visits. So of those 17 patients, 12 had a decrease in the number of visits that they had. And then the next column talks about the visits before enrollment and then visits after. So those 12 patients, the 17 patients had a total of 32 visits before and then 13 visits after. and that shows you the reduction rate. Second row, emergency department visits, we had 10 patients that had a decrease, so over half, and you can look at the visit numbers. The hospitalizations is a little different because only 4 patients had a hospitalization before. None of the high-risk readmission patients are included in this table because they hadn't completed the 6 months, but I'll talk about them. So only 1 of the 3 patients had a reduction in hospitalization. So in other words, the other 3 had one before and then had one after. So the medical management of medical conditions, this was the kind of the primary reason in which people were referred. Those are the conditions which we documented as that referral condition. So diabetes and chronic pain had the most prevalent enrollment. The enrollment numbers then, you can see 11 of those patients finished 6 months post-enrollment, and you can see those are the raw numbers of clinic, ED, and hospitalization reductions. Some of the other reasons, falls and home safety. So each patient that was enrolled after a fall had occurred, so they had at least one fall, and then post-enrollment, no patients had an additional fall. So, and then we had some patients that were enrolled for like INR checks and BP checks, and of the INR patients, there were 3 INR patients, and they had a total reduction of 48 INR visits to the hospital. So they'd have to go to basically the local lab to have their INR checked. Instead, we just did it in their home. So the high-risk readmission patients, these were only at about 3 months post-enrollment, but at the time of the analysis, none of the patients had been admitted to the hospital or readmitted to the hospital. So if you look at the 72-hour window, each patient had passed that. Patient experience survey. So I'm a caveat here. This survey was not probably done in the best manner. We don't necessarily see these results as too legitimate because of the way we delivered it. And how we did that is we had the actual community paramedic ask the questions and then document it right in front of the patient. So it's not your best, not the best methodology for delivering a survey. So we don't put too much stake in this. This one, however, interestingly, the referring physician survey, we did this one legitimately. We did an online, anonymous online tool survey and asked the physicians that referred the patients a series of questions. I just put 3 up here. But I want to point out that when we talk to other health systems or we talk to within our own health system about expanding our program, this is the piece of information they find most valuable. They really care about what the referring physicians think about the program. And the physicians' opinions have been very good. So some of the challenges, as a closing slide, the documentation and care planning. So when we first started this, we wanted the physicians, the referring physicians, to create a care plan to outline the goals of care. So what is it you want us to do? And especially with emergency room physicians, we didn't see the documentation of care planning to occur. So we kind of created our own, and we're kind of in I guess we're trying to figure out yet how exactly we want to address that. Outcome measures are tough, and there's a lot of outcome measures. We focus today primarily on utilizers, but there's clinical outcomes, and the way in which you measure one patient, for instance, a fall prevention patient, is not a way you're going to measure a diabetic patient. So there's a lot of different outcomes, and just to acquire the information we talked about here, it's not easy. It's painstaking, it's manual. There's no way, eventually, we want to have a system where you can just pull up a dashboard and it'll give you the information that we showed you. So that's something we're still trying to figure out. And then, of course, the financial information, or the financial piece of it's tricky for us. In Wisconsin, there's no state mandated or no standard for reimbursement. So basically, if our system's fairly unsustainable unless the health system will pump in money to help, pay for it in the future. So, questions?
So you're in your first 6 months of this. What are your goals for 12 and 24 months out? Have you set them yet?
So our internal goal is, as Dr. Krantz started out by saying, is we want to have a decent amount of patients enrolled. We want to have similar data to what we have now. to present internally so we can expand our program to further, regions within our system. So as far as like particular thresholds of percentages of trying to, reduce by 50%, no, we don't have any specific goals.
So you're specific in the one county that Dr. Krantz showed. I guess my question is, how do you plan to push this through Mayo, seeing how they have other large areas of demographics that, as other providers have talked to around the world, might be better suited for community paramedicine as opposed to the rural area?
Yeah, I mean, we chose this because it's a small area and it's kind of an easy way to kind of, lean into it. I think the next step is to use a rural or an urban area. We have, within our health system, we have probably 4 or 5 urban markets that we can try to replicate this in. Dr. Krantz, do you want to add anything to that?
So we do want to expand. Every provider that we've talked to wants this in their community. I'm getting requests weekly from individuals, when is this going to expand? I believe the first goal was to provide this data. The Office of Population Health, again, felt that there are a lot of organizations or parts of the Mayo organization that were targeting these patients, and we needed to show that this system worked. And this program wasn't just the pilot and getting the data, it was also working out the issues, the development of the medical record, working and coordinating with all of the agencies involved. My hope is that it expands. In the state of Wisconsin, it's non-reimbursable at this point. There's legislation that's moving forward in Wisconsin this year that may change that process. But in Minnesota, it's relatively robust, and I know Mayo being based in Minnesota, Gold Cross being based in Minnesota, it's a big thing for them, and the hope is that this will expand. We did a preliminary run, probably 3 or 4 months ago, where we discussed our findings, our preliminary findings with Population Health, because we needed approval to move through Gold Cross, Mayo College of Health Sciences, am I saying that right? And developing our own community paramedic program. So as we started on the Hennepin Tech model, but as we started looking at that, we needed to preload that. So we asked for permission, and they gave us the thumbs up. And I think we're getting pretty much the thumbs up from everybody up the line. It's just presenting our final data and then getting the go-ahead to commit resources. So.
Thanks for sharing. Curious, did you survey your staff? And then what appetite is there amongst your medics for this?
So we have 2 community paramedics. We didn't do a formal survey. No, that's something I think we probably ought to do. Just subjectively, they really enjoy the program. I mean, they carry their cell phones around. We give them cell phones, and they have patients calling them when they're at home, not at work. One thing I didn't mention that was interesting was I meant to mention this, but our 911 call volume for this group of patients has actually increased. And what we see amongst that group of patients is that they're mainly non-transported patients. It's a way for them to try to see their community paramedic outside of their scheduled visit time is what we've honestly determined. So it's strange. But yeah, we're getting really good feedback from the paramedics. They really like it.
We perform a weekly huddle on Friday morning. So the whole group gets together and we discuss any issues, any concerns, patient care plans. And again, kind of anecdotally, but certainly no major issues, very appreciative of the opportunity. They work 911 half time, and half the other time they work community paramedic, and I think they enjoy their CP time more than they do their 911 time, quite frankly. So.
The 2 spousal referrals, were those patients, with a spouse, like, does that represent a couple that was being cared for by the community paramedics?
So in 2 cases, we went to a patient's home. I believe it was both times, their husbands saw what was going on and said, I think I could benefit from this too. So they spoke to their physician and became referred in. So when they do a visit, they actually visit with both of them at the same time. Yeah.
All right, thanks. And every paramedic that graduates from our paramedic school at the Mayo College of Health Sciences comes out with a degree. So we're on that bandwagon. We're going to, we've got the special guest today from the Netherlands, and they're going to do a description of the ambulance work in the Netherlands. So Jacob, I can't pronounce his last name. He said I could just call him Jacob.
Why make it difficult if you can do it easy? Let's start with some of the fundamentals. Any ambulance group I've spoken to, there's always somebody who is a collector of ambulance models and who wants to have all the models of all the services. So, for this one person, I've got a Dutch ambulance. It's sold. Sorry. And for the others who were a little bit slow, I've also got a couple of these. And I know there's one that was already lost because he needs to make his collection complete, and he couldn't miss this one, but there's still a lot left here. So now it's complete. So having that done, let me first introduce me. My name is, in Dutch, Jaap Hatenboer, or what I said to Gary, Jacob from the Netherlands. As you saw, I brought some bribes with me, and I didn't need them all because I feel a little bit as a party crasher. I was not in the program, so I was a kind of a last-minute addition to the program, and thank you very much for the people from Mayo to leave a spot for me. I'm actually former Air Force. I was an Air Force officer when I came over to the EMS system, and I was kind of a stranger walking in a strange world and trying to understand how this worked. It turned out to be simple and complex at the same time. And that's where you will find it as a thread through my whole presentation, that this is about complexity, but it's also about cutting through complexity. And a part of the complexity is us ourselves because we use words. But just let me begin with the beginning. Probably a lot of you might know the expression, to boldly go where no man has gone before. Yes, I'm the age of the very first Star Trek series with James T. Kirk going on his 5-year mission. Well, for us, it's a more than 5-year mission. Ours started in 2008, visiting Kaiser Permanente in Boulder, Colorado, because we saw our environment changing. And we made a very conscious decision that we needed to be more aware of what's happening around us. So I've been on this 8-year mission with my colleagues, one of my colleagues here with me, to find out what's happening in the world and to cut through the complexity, because there is so an incredibly large amount of noise. All these signals, and you try to get through the essential points in what's happening, what is changing. And for us, it was a very interesting journey. It's an ongoing journey, which meant I've been at Nova Scotia. I've visited the New Island Health Centre on Briar Island, or Digby, been at Parsborough Collaborative Emergency Centre, been at Colorado, Christchurch, New Zealand, Canterbury region, very interesting. And last October, I was at the Hyderabad Operations Centre of the GVK Emory Ambulance Service, which is, as far as I know, the biggest in the world, running an ambulance service with around 11,000 ambulances. At a price level at approximately 1/100th of that of ours. So there's hardly any money in the system, but still it's very, very effective. And it tells you a little bit about the story I want to tell you, and it goes like, where do we start the story? Does this story actually start at the EMS system? Or shouldn't we start somewhere else? Shouldn't we start at the community? So that's one of the things. What I always also want to say is that I'm very much convinced that if you've seen one EMS system, you've only seen one EMS system. So we know that after we've made this visit, after we've heard all these stories, it will take us a lot of time to really connect what you've been telling to us with our own system. And it turns out that takes by far the biggest amount of energy. Just translating what we are hearing here and then connecting it to what's happening in our system. So we've making one mind map after another, trying to connect and to understand what's the value of all these stories and what's the value of what's happening. And for us, this day number 3, we started with the Ambulance Leadership Forum. And those who have missed it, you've really missed something, because there were some presentations who were, we felt like exactly drilling down to what's the crucial problem. And we think a lot of the crucial complexity is about how we handle change, and that changing is a very difficult thing for systems. So the problem with being a party crasher is that my slide deck is much too long. There are a lot of videos in it. It means you won't see everything, but I've already given Gary the whole package with the hyperlinks. So I'll suppose he'll put it on the website, and then you can just follow all the videos, which are just illustrations of the story. So it still all goes back to cutting through complexity. And now I'll need to. Is it this one or is it the? Sorry. I'll point it there. Yeah. This is the title. You've just been Ubered. I've just put it down because it tells a little bit about what's happening and what our response on it is. We found out that there was a video on YouTube from December 2015 by, I think, somebody called Kimmel about the ambulance and about showing how that might revolutionarily change ambulance services. And of course, the video is in the slide deck, but it's ridiculous. But it's technology, and it's technology that's coming towards us, and it's part of the signals you get. And part of the signals you want to understand, like what is really happening here, and does this really change some of the aspects of our system? Are we in a change process? Yes, we might be. What I wanted to show you first is a little bit about the Dutch ambulance service. It's an animation, it's on the next slide, and it's quite complicated. And that's why I said cutting through complexity, because there's something strange about the numbers. You'll see some numbers, like we've got A1 and A2, and in England you've got the red 1 and red 2 calls. And, sorry, one back. That's where the video is. Just wait a moment before you start it. This looks like I'm in control, but actually, if you really want to know who's in control, she is. This is just your toy controller. The numbers, they don't fit. It's, we are in the Dutch ambulance service at approximately 1/3 of the workload of an English ambulance service. Our EMS, our A&E departments are approximately at 1/3 of the workload of UK A&E departments. Our general practitioners last year did something like 5 million patient contacts in their emergency assignment, in their emergency system. We are being defended by our GPs. And our GPs take off so much of our workload. And I think that are the kind of things that are lost when you use the same words. An ambulance with us is very compatible, very comparable to the ambulance you use. And that we call it a nurse and you call it an advanced care paramedic doesn't make that amount of difference. But it seems like if you drill down to the numbers, you're looking at a different system. Or you're looking at a system that's differently used. So if you would please start it now. And it's in English. There's an incredibly big sound system over there, and it's not making a lot of noise. This was actually the only thing we didn't test this morning. Last technical solution is put a mic at the laptop. And I think time-wise I could better tell you a little bit about it while you're looking at it. 17 million people, as you saw.
Are received. Ambulance request calls are also received from GP. Every ambulance on the road is supported by an entire organisation. In the Netherlands, there are 25 independent regional ambulance services. They provide ambulance care within their own area. That always starts in the ambulance care dispatch centre. This is where the 112 emergency calls are received. ambulance request calls are also received from GPs, hospitals, and care homes. The dispatch centre operators have a nursing background. They can assess the situation quickly. They decide whether an ambulance is sent and with what priority. 112 callers are sometimes referred to a GP or out-of-hours clinic. While the ambulance is on its way, the dispatch centre operator gives advice and the first vital care instructions to the 112 caller. The operator also passes on all information about the patient to the ambulance while it's on its way. In the Netherlands, approximately 750 ambulances are stationed at more than 230 ambulance posts. The ambulance care dispatch centre operator always monitors which ambulances are being used and which are free. On average, 1.2 million ambulance trips are made each year, and this number is likely to increase. 3/4 of those trips are urgent. In a life-threatening situation, the ambulance with flashing lights and siren reaches the patient within 15 minutes. We call this an A1 trip. If there is no immediate threat to life, but a serious health risk exists, this is called an A2 trip. In that case, the ambulance travels without flashing lights and siren and reaches the patient within 30 minutes. Ambulance trips that can be planned in advance are called B trips. For instance, if a patient has a hospital appointment and may require complicated care during the journey, the mobile intensive care unit is also part of the scheduled ambulance care service. If no complicated care is required during the journey, the care ambulance is often dispatched. The important consideration in this case is patient comfort, which is provided by the care ambulance assistance. On occasions, the dispatch centre deploys a rapid responder. That is an ambulance nurse who travels alone in a small ambulance, on a motorbike or a bicycle. Some regions also have an ambulance boat or snow scooter. The ambulance has advanced equipment. The ambulance nurse has been trained to provide high-quality care at any location. The ambulance driver offers medical assistance and ensures the safe transport of the patient. They work as a close team and always according to national guidelines and protocols. If necessary, the patient is transported, following consultation, to a specialised hospital that may be further away. When the patient is transferred, all required information is exchanged. This exchange is increasingly being handled digitally, directly from within the ambulance. 1 in 5 patients do not require hospital treatment once care has been provided. They are often advised to visit their GP. The annual macro budget for ambulance care is approximately €525 million. The ambulance care service employs more than 5,600 professionals. You can always count on them, 24 hours a day, throughout the year. The ambulance staff cooperate with GPs, hospitals, care homes, mental health care services, domestic care services and midwives, and of course, colleagues from the police and fire service. The ambulance care staff are always ready, waiting and professional. Ambulance care. We provide it together.
It sounds a lot like the same in other countries, only the words are a little bit different, and we've got the nurses and, well. But it's a very old video already. And it's not only the staff uniforms which will change, but also how we look at the system. And what I said, if you drill down the numbers, you'll find that the numbers in the systems are different, and they might be, the differences might be so big that you might even think they are actually different systems. That's one thing. But the other thing is also that these acute care systems are changing, and they're changing rapidly. And that's the thing I would like to pick up and look a little bit at what is changing at the moment. And I would just pick up one pathway, just one. That's the out-of-hospital care, the out-of-hospital cardiac arrest pathway, which is changing very rapidly in the Netherlands. And I'll just go by, I'll just pick up the different aspects, because we kind of had the view that we could do this as professionals, and it turns out that we take a backseat in this whole process. And I'll show you how this works in the Netherlands. I'll have to learn this. First, there's a lot of English documentation available. It's already on the memory stick. Gary got it, and our Dutch ambulance organization has it on its website. So, and we do lots of reports, and we've learned to do our reports in English. because otherwise we would just get stuck in our own little 17 million language area. This is, of course, the out-of-hospital cardiac arrest chain of survival. Starts with recognition and ends with the advanced life support and post-arrest care. I often use this one. This one is from Scotland. This one gives a little bit more of an explanation who is doing what at which moment. So it's a more detailed one. And this is how we normally show it. And this is where the lying begins. Let's say where the alternative facts begin. Yes, and we want to be second if you've seen the video. What does this show? It shows somebody who might have had a cardiac arrest. Actually, it's one of our communication guys who didn't have a cardiac arrest, but that's how you make those pictures. Of course, it was immediately noticed. So it was a witnessed out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. There was immediately somebody who started CPR, and you see somebody running towards the incident with an AED, and then in the background you see the ambulance. And of course, this isn't how it really happened. And this is what I said, it's way cooler than the reality. Because reality is harsh. And the way we look at reality is that we are not anymore in the center. There's something we, kind of borrowed from New Zealand, and they borrowed it from London. So this originates from a project in London. We put the community in the middle. We said this is about the community. So if something which has a time element happens, then your community will be close by. They're the only people who will be physically really close. And then there is, of course, a whole care system, healthcare system, but it's always at a distance. There's always time necessary to get them on location. So we use this to understand that this is actually about where does it happen and what is the environment in which it has happened? What's the community? How does it look like? This is a video I won't show, but we have a kind of warped feeling about time. This is a timer that just times down 2 minutes. And those 2 minutes are necessary for us. That's the lowest estimate. That's what the time we need to decide in the control center what kind of call it is, what kind of location it is, and then to give the incident through to the team, and then the team needs to become mobile. So this is just call taking and mobilization. You haven't traveled a meter yet. You haven't gone any closer to the incident, but you've lost already 2 minutes. So last time I gave this presentation to a whole group of medical students, and I asked them to keep their breath for 2 minutes. And I said, this is approximately what happens to somebody. And normally for us it would take, around 10 minutes to reach the incident. What would this mean, 10 minutes? Well, that's simple. People would die. Survival rate after 10 minutes is practically zero. It's whatever research you grab from the big stack of research on this subject. But if you do nothing, 10 minutes and there's no chance of survival. And all the lines on the graph on the right side, they all go down very quickly. So chances the chance to survive this cardiac arrest or to come out with a good outcome becomes, it decreases enormously every minute, every second. And what you need is very fast CPR, then very fast defibrillation if necessary, and then the whole professional acute care system that kicks in. We found out that it's impossible for us to reach those first minutes. And that means that we have a problem with this whole chain of survival. We are just somewhere at the end of the chain of survival. We're not in the beginning of the chain of survival. Actually, we're not much helping in survival. And that's not a very nice conclusion. So what is our friend? Well, this is one of our friends. One of our friends is, that's the 4th Industrial Revolution. And it's now, it's now like characterized as the 4th Industrial Revolution, but it tells you something about what's happening in technology. And I'll just skip through this very quickly. But in 1983, somebody was very proud if he could get this phone, which had actually full 30 phone numbers to store. and it costs only $4,000. And there are some movies where you can still see somebody at leaving a prison getting this phone returned when he leaves prison and starts doing all kinds of mischief again. This is where it started. 2007, 2008, technology got in a whole different pace. And of course, we all know these kind of things. And there's one video I'd like to show you. We always tell that technology is difficult and that's difficult in our organizations to change because people have difficulty to change. I don't agree with that. And we'll show in this video, because this is a video that starts in 1999. That's not so long ago. That's, well, just count back to your own age at that moment. And people were interviewed about their acceptance of mobile phones.
Heeft u een mobiele telefoon?
Nee hoor, heb ik niet.
Waarom heeft u er geen?
Nou, ik zie er net niet van in.
Dan ben je aan het fietsen en dan word je gebeld.
Ik heb gewoon een telefoon, waarvoor moet ik een mobiel hebben?
Dat is handig. Maar als ik ergens strand, dan is er ook altijd ergens wel een telefooncel of een boerderij met een boer met een telefoon.
We hebben het jaren zo gedaan en ik vind het wel goed zo.
Als mensen mij bereiken willen, dan kunnen ze dat met een brief doen. En is het dringend, dan ben ik telefonisch thuis te bereiken.
Heb je wel eens gehoord van een drone?
Drone?
Een drone.
Nee.
Waarom van een drone? Stel dat u een drone heeft, waarvoor zou u dat gebruiken?
Aan de buren te bieden hier. Naar de Albert Heijn.
Ja.
Ja, dat moet ik nog maar eens even zien.
Als een vliegtuig zomaar binnenkomt en dan vraagt aan een hoe noem je dat? Cashier? Mag ik een flesje water? Dat gaat toch niet?
Kunt u zich voorstellen dat u zo'n 3D-printer gaat aanschaffen?
Nee, nooit. Waarom ik geen één heb?
Ja.
Omdat het niet betaalbaar is voor mij.
Ja, nou ja, nog eens, wat moet je ermee? Heeft u wel eens gehoord van de Google Car?
Google Car? Nee.
Een Google Car, dit is niet je eigen auto. Ja, het is wel een beetje jammer. Ik vind het wel leuk om een eigen auto te hebben.
Dan hoeven we geen rijbewijs als we 18 zijn.
Ja. U bent taxichauffeur. Maar dan bent u op een gegeven moment natuurlijk overbodig, of ziet u dat niet zo?
Nou ja, misschien wel.
Heeft u wel eens gehoord van de Google Glass?
Ja. Ik stel me nou voor dus dat bij u zit. U heeft fantastische ogen als ik naar u kijk, ja? Godverdamme, heeft ze nou dat dingetje daar voor de ogen zitten?
Ja, dan zit iedereen thuis met zijn Google Glass of in zijn Google Car en zijn drone haalt boodschappen. En als er iets stuk gaat, dan print je het uit. Je hoeft helemaal niet meer met mensen om te gaan. Heerlijk.
Person as an individual have no problem in adapting to new technology if we want it. And I think that's something we need to realize, that if people want something, if they want their driver license when they are 18, they can actually not wait to get their hands on these new possibilities. Like you heard the girl say, hey, I don't need a driver's license to get mobile. That's a little bit worrying if you're parents of like girls in that age group. They perceive it as mobility, and mobility is, freedom. And they like that freedom. So we kind of adapt very easily to new technology, and Google Glass, that's also over. We're now into Microsoft HoloLens. So it seems that we have no problem with adapting to technology, and technology can help us. What we now see is that we used to see one computer for a lot of persons. Now we have multiple computers around us. In my bag, I already got an iPhone and an iPad, and there is a multitude of computers here in this room. That means that we also see new forms of computers. We see these kind of wearables. And that's when it becomes interesting, because those wearables mean that you got computers and you've got connectability. And for the automotive industry, that means that there is a process now called eCall, in Japan it's called decall, which means when a car had an accident, listen to this, when the car had an accident, then the car will call the operation center, the communication center, and will give the details to the communication center and say, yeah, I had 2 passengers, both airbags went off, and I'm here. Please do something. And of course, our cardiologist said, I've got a lot of high-risk patients. I'm now implanting IEDs. They are high-risk components with lots of risks for the patient. Couldn't I put a system like this on our high-risk patients? and know more about what's happening to them and get this whole acute care system working without any interference from technology sitting there as a problem in time, as something which needs to be activated. It will activate automatically. And then you're back, and then you see, hey, recognition and activation of the emergency response system can be improved a lot by technology, well-used technology, and people have no problem in accepting it. So they've got number one. There was a number two, I'll just return, immediate high-quality CPR. And that's where our system becomes very strange for you. For every one paramedic, I've got 100 volunteers. Please remember that number. We've got a Heartbeat Now Foundation, and we've got another that's Heart Safe Living. They're now being integrated. We've got well over 100,000 CPR volunteers, which means that there is hardly any cardiac arrest where we arrive where CPR hasn't been started already, which is incredibly important for the patient, but also for the value of the community, because it's actually your neighbor saving your life. Not some professional from far away. They're very happy that the professionals arrive, but it starts with your neighbor. So when we arrive, we see the front door is open and the bikes are already there in the garden. And we know, okay, the volunteers have arrived. We also register the AEDs in the same system, and the AEDs are a different problem because we need to register them very well. And we got a system where we send part of the volunteers directly to the victim, and the other part of the volunteer group is sent first to the AED to pick it up and to get the AED to the location. We found out that the second part, the AED part, is now the more difficult part. And that's where technology can help us. Again, return to the fourth industrial revolution. This is John Kimmel with his Jubilance sketch. I'll skip it because of time, and I need to be within my time, scheduled time. We might use Uber in high metropolitan areas to bring the AED. In New York, they're now getting a 2.2 minute response time. So why don't put the AED on the Uber car and let them bring the AED? But it doesn't solve our problem in rural areas. But there we've got another solution. We already had a student studying on doing a thesis on drones for good and building an automatic drone AED. That might be something for the rural areas. It's a very big step, still technologically, regulation, safety, but it is a way to approach the problem of getting valuable, expensive equipment to a location in a rural area quickly. And I know, of course, that Zipline is already doing something like this in Rwanda. So we're making steps, but it's also a regulation thing. And there is a video about it, and you can look at it if you want to. So if we then return to our chain of life, we see that technology is actually helping us to get the best result out of a community, helped by technology, helped by professional paramedics. And that's the model we see. So we see community and paramedics standing a little bit further apart from each other. The community, that's where you're looking at. You look at technology helping you, and you look at the paramedics supporting the whole system, the paramedic system, as a paramedic system supporting the community. And we do these kind of action, getting as many people as possible, which gives all kinds of troubles. Just one anecdote. We only want registered volunteers. We only want registered AEDs. So all the medical students are being trained in CPR. That's part of their training. And they don't get an accredited degree. They just see it as part of their training, so they do it, they tick the box, and then they are not allowed to enter our system, which is mind-boggling how our system is sometimes so disconnected. What it means for us is that it's all about teams, and that the team actually starts with a community wanting to do more. So we're now experimenting with menu cards, where we can actually start a discussion with the community and say, okay, there are lots of possibilities, how you can work with the fire service, with the police, with the ambulance. It's up to you what you want. If you have a very elderly population, you want to keep them in your community, you want to give the possibility to even die within your community, you need to build something within those communities. If it's more about a young community, lots of students, very young, very active, you build something else. If it's about the fire service being too far away, you build more about fire. So you're starting to have this discussion with a community, and that's something which is brand new for us. We found out that there's a lot of people who want to engage with us. We had never expected that we would be over 100,000 volunteers, and now we're seeing that we need to be activating, helping, assisting, supporting the community, and put the community needs in front of the whole, starting the whole story. For us, that means also a discussion with our own people. So we've stopped writing reports. We switched over to visualizing, and we stole this from the St. John Ambulance Service in New Zealand. And actually, the organization that made the big picture posters for New Zealand has also done ours. So we have switched over to big pictures as a starting point for our conversation with all the other people, all the other stakeholders, and of course with the community. And we've also made animations in German, French, Dutch, but also in English. And that's something I would like to offer to Gary. There is the video, the animation is on it. It's a 10-minute animation, but it's not within my time, by a lot of time. So maybe he would allow me to show it during the break. So I'll keep it here. It's now a wide screen, and it doesn't need to be started. That was my presentation. What I just going back full circle. Cutting through complexity, I think, is very important. So just what is really happening and what can we really do and what's valuable. And it's a whole system thing we are doing. And the out-of-hospital cardiac arrest pathway was just choosing one pathway out of a lot of things that are happening at the same time. Thank you very much.
So we're back to magic time. So we're going to hold on the video, but we've got time at 4:30. So we'll do the video at 4:30, and that will lead into our discussion about how everybody thought today went. All right, break time, 30 minutes.
That's the French one. That's very interesting. Ja, dat is mijn dingetje.
Point it that way, yeah.
Well, now I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get up there.
Okay. Okay. No. Huh? Two of them. Will that do it? All right, let me move pockets. That did it? Well, almost. We're good. Oh, sure.
All right, so I'm the one that if you don't give me your presentation, I get really mad. So I have a couple of people and you know who you are. So if you haven't given me the presentation for anything before lunch tomorrow, can I get it before we leave today? Is that all right? And I was trying to think what else I was gonna say. Can't remember. I'll just intervene next time.
Okay. And believe me, you don't want to be on Ann's bad side.
Experience?
Yeah, experience. Yeah, that's experience talking. Let's see if. That was it. All right.
I don't want to touch it anymore.
Yeah, it's radioactive. Yeah. Okay, our next session is on We Care, a community paramedicine program, and Josh Mailing, the director of We Care. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you. Hi, once again, my name is Josh Mailing. I'm with the Fishers Fire Department. I'm a lieutenant in a fire-based EMS system, so I'm a lieutenant on a fire truck, so I still do first response as a paramedic. I don't transport anymore, but I definitely see a need for a community paramedic program in our community, and so we ended up being able to create something to fill a void that some of our patients were falling through. Once again, I'm from Fishers, Indiana, so if any of you aren't familiar with the U.S. at all, you may be familiar with racing. So if anybody's been to the Indianapolis 500, if you haven't been, greatest spectacle in racing, come and see us. We're only about 30 minutes away from the track. So about 58 square miles that we cover, and population is closing in on 90,000 and growing fast. What I thought I would talk about today is kind of how we developed the program and what we've seen with patients and some of the data that we've collected. I'll talk about the community risk assessment, coalition building that we had to do, some of the program development and implementing the program, some of the data collection stuff that we do and the analysis that's starting to come out of that, and then talk about reassessing our community risk. So one of the first things we did was when we started to do this program was right as the ACA was starting to come out. So we started to look at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, 30-day readmission penalties. So we knew we were going to have to work with the hospitals because they didn't have anything in place to help prevent those. They did have some things, but it looked like it wasn't as successful as they had hoped. We looked at our high volume calls or loyal customers or frequent flyers, whatever you want to call them. And then I looked at mortality and morbidity in our area. And I utilized our State Department of Health that collects all the data on that. And it's their ERC or Epidemiology Resource Center. And that was excellent, got a lot of data out of that. Really understood what was going on in our community. So we had 5 areas of risk that came out from that. We had quite a bit of hypertension, and then we had a lot of falls and social service needs, which we found out that's mainly what our program ends up being utilized for. Flu and pneumonia for at-risk populations, so our children and our older adults. And then we were looking at patient readmissions to the hospital. So these are the patients that didn't qualify for home health. And I know that's a big concern for a lot of the home health care nurse groups. that they didn't want us taking over what their job was. But we're catching those patients that do not qualify for home health care. And then behavioral health issues. And this was extremely huge, but we found out that my bosses and the community were not ready to tackle that at the time that we were doing this program. And that was right around 2014 when we started doing development. And I'll talk about it later at the end of the slideshow, that we've had some things that happened in our community, especially around teenage suicide, that has really brought this to the forefront. So we're doing some programming around that. So some really neat stuff going on. So coalition building. So we knew that we had to get a bunch of groups together to make this work and to get buy-in from the hospital, from the community. Some of the groups that we work with, Health Call, we utilize them for our EPCR that we use for the program. And they also have some clinical people that help us out with program development that have done some of these things in the hospitals before. Community Health Network, that is the hospital system that actually decided that they wanted to utilize community paramedicine for certain health populations, mainly around congestive heart failure, and that's really the big part of the program that I'll talk about today, what we're doing with patients with heart failure. We also look at Aspire. Aspire is a group that takes care of our behavioral health issues within the county that we live in. So they kind of organize the care plans and who those people with behavioral health issues, who they're seeing. Also Good Samaritan Network and Partnership for Healthier Hamilton County. We utilize this group in our community. They help organize services that are out in the community and help advocate for services that are needed. So we created a partnership with them to help bring those issues to the forefront to legislators or council members and at the county level as well, so that we could get funding for projects that are needed, especially around like transportation is a big issue. And then I've got the International Association of Firefighters. We have the union that we work with for services that we contract with the fire department. So I knew I had to have them on board to utilize our hours for this service, because it's outside of our normal scope of practice, providing EMS service and fire service for the community. So Community Health Network is who we ended up partnering with. It's a large multi-service health system in Metro Indianapolis. The main hospitals that we work with are Community North, Heart and Vascular that takes care of all the cardiology for the north side of Indianapolis, and then northern suburban area. And then their home health care, which we utilized for some of our falls prevention programming. And then behavioral health, and that is really starting to come to a forefront now. Community behavioral health actually has the beds for those patients that need in-hospital care for behavioral health issues. So program development, we got together a work group within Community Health Network from multiple specialties. We wanted to use evidence-based medicine and evidence-based assessments. And we wanted to make a seamless transition from hospital to home. That was really important for us, because we ended up noting that a lot of patients, when they've got this education in the hospital, all they heard was, "I'm going home." And everything else that the nurses, pharmacists, dietitians tried to teach them was lost by the time they got home. So you can see a few of the groups that we got together. Like Touch Point is like a social services group within community health. We worked with the heart failure coordinators to help with the programming so that we could make sure that we were getting the right information to those patients. We got marketing involved because we wanted to make sure that we could get the project out to the public in a nice fashion. And then as well, social work, we brought those in because we knew that that was going to be a big need. So we also brought in the clinical director of operations for Health Call, and they actually had done some of these programs before, not necessarily called community paramedicine, but it was with the nurses in the hospital. So some of the things that we did, I know another group had talked about how they find patients that qualify for the program. We use LACE, which is a systematic approach to identify at-risk patients for readmission. We also use teach-back method, which is, there's some trials that show that that helps with 30-day readmission problems, and we also use zone educations. And I've got some examples of those so you can see those. So the LACE index, we look at length of stay, their acuity of admission, whether they came through the AD or the ED, excuse me, or elected to come in and then they were admitted. Comorbidities, and then ED visits within the last 6 months. And that provides an index of risk for patients. So here's kind of the LACE index. And what we do is we don't have to do this on paper or anything. We use EPIC, very similar to Cerner, and it actually runs the patients through the program and then selects those patients that fall within the risk pattern that we're looking for. The other thing we do is for the teach-back method, we actually have, this is a 3-week course that we put through Health Call that all of our community paramedics have to go through prior to even going through the education for disease management and medication reconciliation. And this actually will teach, how to build that rapport with patients, how to coach them, and so that they want to learn to manage their own disease. And this, I will say, is probably the biggest thing I do for our patients, especially those patients in heart failure and COPD. We use the zone process to teach them how to manage their disease based on their care plan. So basically, the top portion has things that the patient can do every day to stay healthy, right? So what we want them to do is we want them to stay in the green zone. So we look at things like they don't have shortness of breath, no swelling, no pain, no weight gain, no chest pain. And so they understand if they stay within this green zone, they're doing very well, right? So, and then we kind of list some things that they can do to continue to stay in those green zones. What we want to do is if they start to have exacerbation of their heart failure, we want them to catch it early on in the process. So we teach them about this yellow zone. So we look at things like weight loss of 5 pounds, weight gain of 2 pounds in 1 day, or weight gain of 5 pounds in 1 week, worsening lightheadedness, tiredness, all these signs and symptoms of heart failure, these early signs and symptoms. And then we coach them to actually contact either us if they want to, their heart failure coordinator, nurse practitioner, or doctor, and actually talk to them about the symptoms they're having. And we've actually found that by doing this, we do medication changes in the home. We just add in extra LASIK and maybe potassium, and it prevents these patients from actually going to the hospital and being readmitted because we catch it so early. So, and then we wanted to understand that, if for some reason you do pass that yellow zone, when to utilize 911 service or 999 here. One of the things that we are doing, we have a toolbox to actually teach this. This is not a validated process yet, but we're actually validating. The patients actually take a survey after we go through the process, and then the educator actually does a survey as well. And the hope is that we can validate this, make any changes if we need to, if the patients aren't getting the information that we want out of it. But we teach them the zones. We talk about the low sodium diet. We actually teach them how to read the food labels. We teach them how to shop in the grocery stores. Most of them tend to shop right in that middle section where they put all the processed food with all the hidden sodium. But we teach them how to actually mitigate that and start to get more in the fresh fruits and vegetables. And then the low fluid diet, most of our patients are on a 2-liter or less diet. So we actually kind of show them what that is, which you would be amazed, especially in the US, we have an issue with serving sizes that we don't really understand what those are. Our plates keep getting bigger, and so do we. So implementation of the program, we came up with a process flow so that we could understand how this was going to run through the hospital, get the patients to the community paramedics, and then how we were going to communicate with all the people that were involved with this patient's care. We did education for heart failure coordinators. who are our transitional care nurses. They are, I always call them the gatekeeper for our patients, because they're the ones that actually find the patient for us, talk to them about the program, and hopefully get them signed up. And then we did education for our community paramedics. And then we had to do a City of Fishers ordinance and a business agreement with the hospital as well that's not on there. So the process flow, I'm not going to go through all this, but honestly, it's confusing. And so we had to find a way to make this easy, right? To make this data flow and the communication flow between all these providers. And we did that with our electronic patient care apparatus. And I have a picture of that later. Education for the heart failure coordinators. We wanted to make sure that they understood the process flow and then how to do the data input on our electronic data capture through Health Call. Because there's a lot of communication that goes with through the electronic data capture system because the hospital did not want to give us full access to Epic. So we have read-only access for those patients so that we can see the medications that they're on, their care plan. But they did not want us to be able to chart in there. So we had to have the heart failure coordinators understand how that works. The other thing that we can actually do with this as well, that we'll add later on, is we'll do education for the nurse practitioners and the cardiologists because we have a way for them to sign in and look at progress notes for the patients that we're following for the 30 days. The education for the community paramedics. When we started the development, there were not a lot of programs out there, so we actually had to do our own education process. So we taught them about the process flow. We made them go through the education for the teach-back method, disease management that was dictated by the cardiologist and the nurse practitioners, medication inventory. So we brought in pharmacists from the hospital, and they provided education for us on how to coach patients for medication adherence. And how to organize their medications, and then to make sure that they were not taking anything that was not on their medication list from the hospital. We taught the EPIC system, which is the electronic health record system. Some of those are difficult to navigate around sometimes to find out what the patient's care plan is. So we wanted to make sure that they understand how to manage through that. And then the health call system and how to manage our patients throughout that. We also, because we wanted to make sure that people understood the competencies, the community paramedics, so what we did was we actually did core competencies to make sure, I don't know if anybody took the old ACLS where you had to sit in front of all the cardiologists and talk about how you were going to implement ACLS protocol before, but it was very similar to that where we had to actually sit down and talk through all the processes that we were going for and had to check off all those competencies. This is our ordinance that we had to go through. And one of the pitfalls that we had going into this when we drafted this was we actually had one city council member who didn't want us to do the program because he sat on the board for the Visiting Nurses Association, who does a lot of home health care. So we utilized Communities Home Health Group and some of our doctors to come in and actually talk with him so that he and that group would understand that that is not what we were doing. In fact, you're probably going to get referrals from us and have more patients. But anyway. The other thing before I move on too is we had to do an agreement with the hospital, business agreement, and I will tell you that is the longest process. Sorry, John, but and John, all the lawyers involved to get those things through. It's a long process. So data collection and analysis. So I wanted a data system that could actually track patients for 31 days and beyond because I'll show you what the schedule looks like, but we also follow patients once I call it graduation, through the 31 days without getting readmitted. I offer for free to follow up on them once a month just to make sure that things are still going well, see if there's any other needs, and especially around the social service needs. I wanted to be able to assess do the assessment in the data collection and analyze that data within the system, and I'll show you some of those reports that we get. I wanted something that was easy to use, that I could teach any of my medics, even some of them that are challenged with computers. So, and then I wanted it to assist in managing large amounts of patients with a small staff, because I don't know if anybody else is like me, but I'm only allowed to have 2 community paramedics, and I have to see quite a few patients, including my other duties. So this is the health call program. What we end up doing is each visit, it'll actually prompt you that you have a visit coming up. You select the patient. It's got a checklist tab on there, so it shows you exactly what's going to happen in this visit prior to going to the visit. And then it's got a dialogue prompter, so whether you're talking on the telephone or actually talking to the patient, I wanted the visit to be the same no matter who was conducting the visit, so it gives you ideas on how to ask those questions. So we get the best data out of it. We do the assessment form, and so we collect everything from vital signs, home safety, patient's weight, so we can calculate that within the system, and anything else, other social needs that are going on in the home. And then we can actually chart in the notes section, and all of our care coordinators can actually see that information as it happens, because this is all cloud-based. And then we've also got the action section, which kind of shows what things you did within that visit, what type of visit it was, did you refer any sources, did you talk to any of the care providers, and then you can go back and look at that data and see if things were fixed. So this is our 31-day schedule for heart failure. So you'll see day 0, basically what you're doing is the patient is placed in triage by the transitional care nurse. So we get a notification that there is a patient in there, with our goal of being within 72 hours of discharge, contacting that patient. We did that because we have quite a few patients that get discharged over the weekend when we're not in the office. Once we make the first call and we get the first in-home visit scheduled, day 1 is considered the home visit. So we go in and we do a full assessment in the patient's home that usually lasts anywhere from 1 hour, and sometimes it goes up to 2 hours, because we find that a lot of these people are lonely and they want to tell you their story, and it's all part of building that rapport with the patients. And I'm actually getting better at it as we go along, so it doesn't take quite as long as it used to, but we definitely do a thorough assessment with the patient. Day 2, we do an automated survey. So I have a phone system, calls up, says, hey, this is Lisa. It sounds like one of my assistants calling, and they actually do surveys. So the day 2 automated survey is more like, did the paramedic know what he was talking about? Did you feel like you got all the information? Go ahead.
Is that a voice conversation, or is it a press button 3? Or?
So it's a push button. So currently,
elderly people that they can cope with that?
yes, yeah, we've actually had high utilization on those reports. Yeah, because I know that's always a concern. And I actually purposely, in the home visit, I talk a lot about the surveys, because this one's important, but the real important one is that day 31 assessment for the overall care that they were given. So, yep. We also have phone assessments where I just actually call the patient and do a similar assessment that's over the phone, and really just coach the patient through things that are going on. We talk about those zones again. What zone were you in today? Did you take your weight? What was it today? And then if they had a weight gain of whatever, 2 pounds overnight, then I can coach them through that process at that time. And we have found that has been a big help, because a lot of these people feel intimidated to talk to the doctor and nurse practitioner. So we give them cues on how to talk to them and speak their language, so that they can actually get the message conveyed. I know we've talked about some of that, the communication that happens. And then once again, day 4, we've got automated assessments. So the automated assessment asks a lot of the same questions too. A lot of them are yes, no, 1 or 2. And then there are where they can type in their weight and their blood pressure. And the system actually calculates for me if there's any issues, and an edit will fire if they've exceeded any of those edits. Sends me a response that says, hey, one of your patients is having an issue, so I can log in and I can go to that assessment, look what's going on, call the patient and make sure that they contacted who they needed to. So, and then the rest of them, automated assessments, and the day 31 is a survey assessment. Once again, very important to find out how we're doing out in the field. So some of the things that we look at, some of the reports that come out of the program, I want to know about adherence. So is the patient, are they following their low sodium diet, low fluid diet? Are they taking their medications? So I can see this regression over time to make sure that we're doing all right, because if I see a dip in this, I want to know why is that, so we can start looking into that. And then also the well-being for patients, because I think that's very important in this. And that just kind of looks at their overall health and how they feel. So some of the data that we're starting to get out of this now, fairly even on sex of patients, 57.14% male, 42.85% female. Average age for males right around 75.6, females just a little bit over 74 years of age. You can see these are the admission diagnosis of the patients that came in to the program. This does not include all their comorbidities. Turns out we're seeing really sick people. And then the one that the doctor that's working on this with me really wanted me to share was our 30-day readmission data. So in 2016, CMS released data that showed about 29 or 21.9% of patients are getting readmitted with heart failure. We had 7.14% of our patients were readmitted. So we think we're on the right track. We don't have enough in yet to really make sure that that's an absolute number, but we're hoping that within this year we'll have enough patients that we can actually publish this. So that's 16. Yep. So early on in the process. So, and we are working with an extremely small hospital at the time. So reassessing community risk. So what we decided with that is that every 5 years we were going to look at all this data again and find out what's going on in our community, if it's changed. When I started on the job 13 years ago, our average age in our community was right around 37 to 38 years old, and we are continually aging. And a lot of families are bringing their parents into the community. So we know that our demographics are changing. And then if we have any significant changes in policy, which I've seen a lot of slides up here that show Donald Trump up here. So we have a new administration, and they vowed to repeal the ACA. So we know there are changes coming down. We just don't know what those are yet. So we want to make sure that we leave some flexibility that if things change tremendously, that we can reevaluate and make sure that our program is providing what our citizens
And if anybody has any questions, I think I have about a minute. Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic question. So because the majority of the patients are cared for through a clinic that's funded sort of indirectly through IHS and the Indian Self-Determination Act, most of those patients are Native American, and their funding is basically guaranteed by IHS, regardless of where they receive care. So that makes it really easy because the billing folks at the clinic just write down the person's name, and money pops into their bank account, the clinic's bank account. It's very neat.
Follow CMS rules, Medicare rules for Joint Commission?
Great question that I don't actually know the answer to. The clinic does follow some Medicare and Medicaid rules, but it also has its own separate IHS-based rules because it is technically a sovereign nation.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Going once?
Uh-oh.
It sounds like you've got a really good system for a very disadvantaged population group. When's the rest of the US going to get a universal health system?
Yeah, that is one of the reasons that we really enjoy working in these areas, is because if you can find the funding, there's a lot of people who really care about taking care of their communities, and it's been an enjoyment for us to work as a part of that. But it's definitely frustrating when you go 2 miles outside of the border of the Navajo Nation and you're back in America, and it makes things quite a bit more complicated.
So let the record reflect that Emily Pierce did not answer the question. When is the rest of the United States going to get a universal health care system?
I went to Alaska a couple of years ago, and I was the guest of EMS and medical people, and they showed me their health system, and all the hospitals are owned by the native people. All the clinics are, all the doctors work for them, all the EMS works for them. And I said, oh, this sounds like a socialised medical system. They said, oh, no, it's not that.
Don't tell anyone, yeah. Alaska is exceptionally fascinating when it comes to EMS and community paramedicine, because they have their CHAPS program, which is also funded by some subsection of IHS. And they have been doing some versions of community paramedicine for decades as well. And is extremely interesting because we are not a long transport at all compared to most of Alaska. So, thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. We can stop streaming now, Chris. We're going to just do a couple of things in closing. First, we have a really, really, really important announcement from Brian Field with InterDev.
Thank you. So, most of you don't know me. My name is Brian Field. Other than that, my team is hard. So, one of the ways, and we're a provider of EMS technology, including EMS. Also, we'd like to get to know everybody. The way we normally do that is over a year. So, we'd like to sponsor a hub from now until Christmas.
That was really, really important. We had to get it out of the way. We're going to watch the other video in just a minute, but I wanted to do a couple of other things. We're doing a trial this year with a couple of the College of Paramedics. We're sponsoring a stream of continuing education for community paramedics at the UK College of Paramedics in May, and then we're going to have that meeting at the universities the day after, where we're going to try to get the paramedic curriculums aligned throughout the nations. And then we're also sponsoring a community paramedicine continuing education stream at the Paramedic Association of Canada meeting in August 18th and 19th, 17th and 18th in Quebec City. And so if you are a community paramedic and you'll be looking for some continuing education, those will be a couple of opportunities for you to jump in on. So what I would like to do today in sort of a wrap-up is I want to pass the microphone around. And what I'd like you to do in 2 sentences or less, maybe a few words, just say something about today, what you learned today, a myth that you got debunked today. You thought one of the speakers was totally off key, that would be me. Just whatever you'd like to say about today, we'd like to hear about today. We'll repeat this exercise tomorrow when we do the closing and get your thoughts about how the meeting went overall. So we'll start here, and just a few words, no more than 2 sentences.
No more than 2 sentences. You make it difficult.
Yeah.
This is how, yeah, it's on. Yeah, for us it's just only taking in, and we're still percolating all the information.
I totally agree.
That'll work.
Definitely differences everywhere, but we're all aiming for the same things. And I think that's really important to get that achievement out, certainly in the UK anyway.
Yeah, we just started off a pilot scheme ourselves in Wales, a community paramedic. So it's great to hear the different ideas and that's been presented during the conference.
I'm sorry I've had to dip in and out because I'd like to have heard more of the sessions. However, the ones I have heard, especially the clinical-based ones in the last session, really interesting, very transferable knowledge, and, you know, we could all learn from each other, which is great.
Just sort of absorbing things. One of the ones that I found that was very interesting was on the assisted death, which in the United States we don't even think about, which is something I think in the long term society is going to have to start looking at much closer.
I think there's just been so much diversity today between and within country, and a few people have said it, but if you've seen one community healthcare system, you've still only seen one. I think that rings true in almost every presentation.
Just really enjoyed listening to what else is going on around the world. Found that really, really interesting.
Coming from education, I've seen such a vast range of things that we can do differently in the UK and learn from colleagues from around the world.
Yeah, I'd echo that, and I think it's what I'm overlooked that I've learned a lot about is how important it is to understand the community you're working in as a paramedic.
I think we always go home from these conferences with a lot of really great ideas. I know I usually go home with too many great ideas, which is probably a better problem than the other end of the spectrum.
It's always interesting to me that even though we come from different countries and use different words sometimes, you know, EMT versus paramedic or whatever, we really do all speak the same language, and that's EMS or whatever you call it in your country. I don't know, but we are really talking about all the same things, so it's really neat to hear that and see how it applies to other countries.
It's just good to see the growth of consideration of the patient being the centre of what we're all about.
Having come to this for 10 years, we're starting to see an alignment between lots of creative ideas and implementation and proper evaluation.
Just a question for you, Gary. What is mobile integrated health?
I think it's just important from the perspective from Canada is we tend to look much like others and build programs that are very robust. But I think it was very important what was mentioned, just to keep it simple. Stop getting too busy, and that's what I've really seen around the room is that to narrow the focus for a little while and get a good look at what you're doing. So.
I think the thing I like the most about this is the combination of new programs with really exciting new ideas, and then still seeing the maturity of the programs that we've been talking about for a couple of years as they're coming to full fruition, and it's really starting to evolve the whole concept of community paramedicine. It's great.
I think again the whole concept that we're sharing common problems and we're all appropriately exerting energy to fix the same problems, and days like today help to demonstrate how if we come together more often and talk about that, our energy comes together and we're more powerful by sharing the ideas. So again, it's the days like today that contribute to success.
Yeah, I think for me, it's actually shows rather than working as just a bunch of parts in a a system, it's actually working as a system for the community.
A lot of great information today. I think I've already revamped our program in my head 10 times. Very intrigued by the automated phone call assessment system that WeCare is using. I look forward to learning more about that.
Again, more information that we're going to bring back, outstanding. I'm interested to know two things. One, how many community paramedics are out there? I mean, do we have a handle on that? How many? I know we're a diverse group worldwide, but I'd like to have that in my head. And are there any movements towards a community paramedic besides the leadership group like this, but basically a refresher training or a seminar of some sort?
Thanks. Just like to comment really on the rapid maturing of the sector, and it's so nice to sit here listening to fully implemented and evaluated programs instead of listening about pilots.
So I'd like to echo the sentiment on the diversity of the programs and the challenges and the difficulties, but looking at the flip side of that, it also shows that there's tremendous opportunity. And I think everybody sees that, and that's really the holy grail, what we're going for.
I think after being in such a one-dimensional sort of sector for a long time, seeing community paramedicine showing the whole health sector just how far and broad our knowledge and skills can be is really impressive.
I think today's highlighted the value of engagement and collaboration with all sectors of the community to end up with a successful program.
I think it's been neat to hear about all the innovation that's happening. So it's an exciting time and fun to be part of it.
Says the one guy who wore a tie.
Yeah, what happened? I didn't get that message. It came off of the presentation.
With all of us being ambulance or emergency service, it's very refreshing to see us moving more towards a clinical-driven healthcare relationship, and at the same time pushing that further out to the community to realize it is community healthcare and has very little to do with emergent response.
And you get a pants?
I echo a little bit of what you said, which is that everybody always talks that the programs are different, and they're not. We're all serving the same patients, and and healthcare is healthcare. It doesn't matter where you deliver it, and it doesn't matter how you do it. It's the same.
I like to see two different things. One is the presentation on the different levels of community paramedicine and how we're looking at as an industry thinking about progressing even within community paramedicine as opposed to just making that an end goal of a paramedic. That was intriguing, and putting it more in terms of the healthcare sector. Also very interesting to hear about the aid in dying, as in Colorado, where I'm from in the U.S. We've passed that recently, and paramedics will be dealing with that much like the rest of the healthcare system.
Speaking to a lot of people here and kind of around England, since I've been in the country since Sunday, noticing that, whatever your thoughts are on the healthcare system, wherever you're from, it's broken everywhere. And the great thing about this group of people is that we are trying to figure out ways to solve problems in our communities, working with what we have. And I just think that's inspiring.
There's an aspect for me where, to use the cliche of preaching to the choir, it's kind of good to know there's a choir. And one of the things that I'll say often is where the history of ambulance as an emergency service and siloed as an emergency service, there's a culture shift to healthcare and talking about patients instead of talking about incidents and calls. And I think that's really, I say that often, but to be in a room where that's being expressed is really, it's great.
as an outsider to your world, and my world is more centered around people that only think of themselves. Every time I'm around you, I am greatly impressed by people that care about other people.
I think there's two things that struck me throughout all of this. Is one is that all the diversity that we have, that, and again, I like preaching to the choir, because the reality is this group, it's easy to kind of check your ego at the door and we're going to share all this stuff. The problem is when we go home and everybody has their own agenda, and there's, you know, the converting that from this to that is really the struggle. And the second part that leads into that, and I'm always shocked by this, is that, you know, we like to come here. This is a great hotel. We had a great meal, et cetera, and this all costs money. But the reality is that the waste and overruns that we put into a system, and what we're doing right now could totally, you know, capture and reduce healthcare costs, but yet we can't seem to get there. It's just interesting that way for me.
Thank you. It's my first time, so well done. The fact that you're here for the 13th time is fantastic. But the word international says to me, where's the other countries? We're all developed countries. We've got an ambulance of some sort, well, or, you know, very good ambulance. We've got very good paramedics out there, and we're doing the best for our patients. But there are a lot of countries in the world that have not got that, and how can we engage them perhaps in the future?
The first thing that struck me is the name of this gathering is the International Roundtable. And yes, we don't have all the countries, but it definitely, to me, feels like a roundtable where we are sharing ideas and have great ideas to take back to our communities.
For me, it's been hearing about learning more about programs that I've read about or seen, and so starting to hear, I forget who said it, but that we're starting to talk about our experiences and not solely pilots. We're still hearing about the pilots, but we're hearing about programs that are moving along.
I really am going last. I'm a preacher's kid. Everyone sit tight. So three things. Pierre, we live close to. We could use some of that money if you get it delivered. Number two, it's a bright future. Very excited to be here and a part of this. And then lastly, I really want to move to the Netherlands.
Yeah. All right. Tracy, did we get you?
Yeah, we did.
Okay, all right. All right, well, thank you for today. We're going to do the video, and then it's open bar time. Go ahead, Ann.
Can you imagine what the future of healthcare looks like? Welcome to this conversation about how we might collectively meet the future health and well-being needs of our communities. In our rapidly changing world, all organizations and individuals need to anticipate and respond to change. And that means we all need to imagine new possibilities. So, Axera has painted a picture about what we think the future could look like. Some of what you'll see is already happening, but much is aspirational. Yet although we've made a start, we really need the imaginations of many organizations and individuals across the healthcare sector and beyond to help us complete it. By starting this conversation, together we can build a shared aspiration for the future. Healthcare in the community has always been and will always be a team sport, with each of us playing our part to deliver these services. Similarly, the conversation about our future needs to be a team effort too. So here's a look at how we see the ambulance service of the future contributing to enhanced health and well-being for all communities. 112. There will always be one emergency number that puts the caller in touch with our nation's combined emergency response team, ambulance, fire and police, and the wider health team. Regardless of what personnel receives the initial call or message, we'll all be connected. This means we will be able to seamlessly hand over the conversation and their information if we think there's a better person or service to handle their situation. When we go to a patient, wherever they are, the local hospital will come with us too, because we'll always be connected to the emergency department. The patient will benefit from our paramedics on the scene, plus any number of medical experts back at the hospital who can give us advice if needed. Working alongside our colleagues from the police and fire services, we will focus on quickly triaging victims, keeping people alive, often with real-time input from A&E trauma experts, and getting them to the right critical care facility as soon as possible. We'll be in constant communication with the hospital as we speed a patient to it, so when we arrive, the hospital team know all about the patient. If we take someone to a hospital appointment, we won't leave them at the door. We'll stay with them, help them navigate around the services, then take them back home again. Our collaboration with neighbouring ambulance services will mean that if anyone needs help in and around the border, the closest ambulance will always be sent to help, even if it's German or Belgian. We will frequently deploy helicopters to accidents and incidents to ensure patients receive trauma care within the critical golden hour. They'll also be a key part of our patient transport capability, enabling us to transport patients to follow-up care as soon as possible. Sometimes our ambulance could actually be a boat. When there's a major event on or around the canals, we'll be ready to respond. Our colleagues in the Royal Lifeboat Service are another key part of our nation's emergency family. When things go wrong offshore, we'll often be part of the rescue plan. Our volunteer lifesavers provide a fantastic community service during the summer. We'll always be in touch, nearby, and ready to provide assistance if they feel as though they're getting out of their depth and need a paramedic. We'll always be at the stadium. The bigger the game, the bigger our team on hand. However people get in touch with us is their call, or tweet. Whether they need information or advice, we'll make sure that we're available by phone, online, browser or apps, or in person. It'll be their choice. People love to skate, but can lose their sense of direction. Just imagine that our 112 app will make it so much easier to call for help, and easier for us to find the caller, because the caller's geolocation information will be transmitted to our teams. New technologies will provide opportunities to explore improvements to how we go about saving lives. Don't be surprised to know that when any large-scale crisis needs managing, we'll be close to the action, working with other agencies and playing our unique part responding to it. If the community faces a pandemic, we'll be ready to take a lead role within any hot zone, working with the wider health team. We will always be buffeted by constant change, good and bad. It might be environmental, social, political, economic, or technological, and the ambulance service will need to be agile so we can anticipate and respond to change. Over time, more healthcare will be provided closer to home, in the community, and even in the home, with better access to a wider range of health experts. It will all be about bringing care closer to where people live their lives. Just imagine the ambulance service active throughout the community, providing additional support from time to time, as well as doing our usual acute care day job and helping move people to and from their home or a hospital. Let's take a look at how community-based care could look in the future. The new community health hubs will be a cross between a hospital and a GP practice, focusing on non-acute community care. Services might include antenatal, COPD, post-operative care, diabetes, physiotherapy, eye specialists, mental health, and even end-of-life care. Community-based call centres will play a vital role, linking local people and their information with the right local or central health services. Sometimes people may feel more comfortable seeking help via an app or even a tweet. However people choose to contact us, we'll be there, providing the same information and advice. A person's doctor will always be in touch with what's happening to them, whether they've visited the community health hub, phoned the community call centre, or had a visit from any other health professional. Our teams will always be a big part of every community, keeping in touch with the various organisations charged with looking after that community, listening, learning, and co-designing services that work. Rest home carers and nurses do a great job looking after our senior citizens and other vulnerable community members. We'll also be there to back them up and provide a helping hand when things get busy for them. Some of our fellow citizens live within a range of restricted facilities. Just like everyone else though, if they require our services at their home, we'll be there. If we have downtime, we won't just sit around. Our teams will take the opportunity to visit some of our most vulnerable citizens, simply to say hi and check they're okay. It won't have to be an emergency before we'll visit people at home. Our teams will regularly drop by to check up on our elderly citizens. It might often make more sense for people to monitor themselves at home and keep their doctor updated through a phone or smart device. We will regularly get together with our colleagues across the health and emergency sectors to review and co-design improvements to how we look after the health and well-being of our community. When our partners in the wider primary health team are out and about in our communities, they'll have instant access to each other and to our team. The information we collect through our activities will be put to good use. We know that privacy is important, so individual data will be securely stored. While we're out and about in the community, our research unit will be busy looking, listening and learning, helping us and the wider health team to understand any trends and opportunities. It will be about ongoing, continuous improvement. We will continue to develop the services and capabilities to ensure that we're always there when people need us. So there you have it, a vision for the future. However, the Xera partners are just a part of the whole story and picture. So come and join us as we begin this incredibly important conversation about how together we can enhance the future health and well-being of our communities. Just imagine what could be possible and what we could achieve together.